Hey guys! Tonight we will see what Persian junk food was like. Before that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comment where you tuning from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Tonight, let us travel quietly back to ancient Persia, where there were no fast food restaurants, packaged snacks, or modern convenience stores, but there were still plenty of simple foods people enjoyed between meals. Imagine warm flatbread fresh from a clay oven, sweet dates, roasted nuts, dried fruits, cheese, honeyed treats, and small foods bought from busy markets and roadside sellers. So settle in, relax, and let the ancient Persian marketplace slowly come to life around you. Before the morning heat. Long before the markets became crowded, before merchants began calling to passing customers, and before the hot Persian sun climbed high above the rooftops, the ancient city rested quietly beneath the soft light of dawn. The night was slowly disappearing. A few pale stars still lingered above the horizon, while the sky changed from deep blue to a gentle shade of grey. The streets were mostly empty. The stone walls and clay houses still held the coolness of the night, and the leaves of the date palms moved softly whenever a breeze passed through them. For a little while, the city belonged to silence. Inside the houses, families were beginning to stir. A mother quietly prepared a small fire. An elderly man stepped into a courtyard and looked toward the brightening sky. A child remained wrapped in a blanket, unwilling to leave the warmth of sleep. And somewhere beyond the houses, a baker had already begun preparing his oven. The first sound came from the grinding of grain. Slowly, steadily, someone turned a heavy stone, crushing grain into flour. The movement was repetitive and peaceful. There was no hurry. It was simply something that had to be done. Grain became flour. Flour became dough. And dough would eventually become bread. Bread was one of the great everyday foods of the ancient Persian world. It could be simple, filling, and easy to carry. A person could eat it at home, take it to work, carry it along a road, or share it with a friend. And although we are using the modern phrase junk food for this journey, the people of ancient Persia would never have thought of their snacks in those terms. There were no brightly colored packets. No fast food chains. No vending machines. No convenience stores open through the night. But there was still hunger. And there was still the desire for something tasty and convenient to eat. That feeling is much older than modern civilization. A worker finishing a long morning might want a piece of warm bread. A traveler might carry dates for the road. A merchant might keep a few nuts nearby. A family might enjoy dried fruit or something sweetened with honey. A person walking through the market might stop beside a small food seller simply because the smell of freshly baked bread was too tempting to ignore. In that simple way, ancient Persia had its own world of casual food. And our journey begins with the morning bread. The baker's oven was made from clay and earth. Inside, the fire slowly grew stronger. At first there was only smoke. Then came the glow of embers. The baker watched carefully, knowing that the temperature needed to be right. He had no modern thermometer. He relied on experience. He knew the color of the fire. He knew the feel of the heat. He knew when the oven was ready. This knowledge had probably been passed down through generations. The baker placed the dough into the heat. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly, the surface began to change. The dough became firm. The edges began to brown. The smell of warm grain drifted into the street. And that smell was enough to tell the neighborhood that morning had arrived. A traveler walking nearby slowed down. A worker carrying a basket looked toward the oven. Someone opened a nearby door. The first customers were beginning to appear. The baker removed the bread. Steam rose gently into the cool morning air. The bread was warm enough to make the hands feel pleasant. One customer purchased several pieces. Another bought only one. A worker carefully wrapped his bread in cloth so that he could take it with him. It was a simple exchange. Bread for coins. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, this ordinary moment tells us something important about food in the ancient world. Not everyone ate elaborate meals. Not everyone sat down to magnificent banquets. Most people simply needed food that was practical. Food that filled the stomach. Food that could survive a journey. Food that could be eaten without complicated preparation. And sometimes, food that was simply enjoyable. The same is true today. We may have countless choices now, but the basic desire remains. Sometimes you are not looking for a grand meal. You simply want something small. Something warm. Something sweet. Something crunchy. Something you can eat while continuing with your day. Ancient people were no different. The ingredients and methods were different, but the feeling was familiar. As the sun climbed higher, more of the city began to wake. Wooden shutters opened. Small shops prepared for the day. Donkeys moved slowly through the streets. A man carried baskets toward the marketplace. A group of travelers gathered beside their animals. A farmer arrived from outside the city with produce. The quiet street was becoming busier. But the morning was still comfortable. The terrible heat of the afternoon had not yet arrived. This was the best time to work. And it was also the best time to travel. Across the Persian world, people were beginning their daily routines. Farmers prepared their tools. Craftsmen opened their workshops. Merchants arranged their goods. Messengers prepared for long journeys. Servants carried water. And travelers thought about the road ahead. For many of them, food had to be practical. A traveler could not carry a fragile feast. A worker could not stop for a complicated meal every hour. A merchant crossing a long road needed foods that would remain useful for several days. This made simple foods extremely valuable. Dates were especially useful. They were naturally sweet, easy to carry, and could provide quick energy. Dried fruits had another advantage. Removing much of their moisture made them easier to preserve and transport. Nuts were also convenient. A handful could be placed in a small container or carried in a cloth pouch. Cheese could add richness to simple bread. And bread itself could become the foundation for almost everything. A piece of bread could be torn apart and shared. It could be eaten with cheese. It could be dipped into other foods. It could be carried on a journey. Or it could simply be eaten by itself while walking down a dusty street. Imagine now that you are walking slowly through this ancient city. The sun has just touched the upper parts of the buildings. The streets below remain shaded. Your footsteps are soft against the packed earth. You pass the baker again. His stall is no longer quiet. Several people are waiting. The bread is disappearing quickly. Nearby, another seller has arranged baskets of dates. The dates are dark and glossy beneath the morning light. Beside them are small piles of nuts. There are dried fruits as well, their colors ranging from golden yellow to deep brown. Nothing is wrapped in plastic. Nothing carries a printed label. Everything is displayed openly. The seller knows what he has. The customers know what they want. And the market is slowly becoming alive. You continue walking. The smell changes as you move. The warm scent of bread fades behind you. Now you notice roasted grains. Then smoke from a small cooking fire. Then the faint sweetness of dates. Then herbs. Then cheese. Every few steps brings another smell. The ancient market is not silent. But it is not yet loud either. The voices remain gentle. The morning has not fully transformed into the busy chaos of midday. For now, there is still time to move slowly. There is something deeply comforting about this moment. A city waking naturally. People preparing food with their hands. Fires being lit. Bread being baked. Animals moving through the streets. Travelers gathering their belongings. And somewhere, perhaps, a tired worker sitting beneath the shade of a wall, eating a small piece of bread before beginning a long day. There is no need for luxury. The food is simple. But simple does not mean unpleasant. Fresh bread can be wonderful. A sweet date can feel like a small gift. A handful of roasted nuts can satisfy hunger. A little cheese can turn ordinary bread into something richer. And honey can transform an otherwise simple treat into something memorable. These foods would have been familiar to people living across the Persian lands. The empire stretched across enormous distances, and different regions had their own ingredients, traditions, and ways of preparing food. Yet certain foods traveled easily. Bread traveled. Dates traveled. Nuts traveled. Dried fruits traveled. Spices and other ingredients moved along the great trade routes. Caravans carried goods from one region to another. Markets connected people who lived hundreds of miles apart. And with those goods came flavors. A traveler could leave one city and arrive in another carrying foods from home. A merchant could discover a new ingredient in a distant market. A baker could learn a different way of preparing something. Food, like people, was always moving. But beneath all this movement was the simple rhythm of daily life. Morning. Work. Hunger. Food. Rest. And then another meal. For now, the morning is still young. The baker continues working. The market grows steadily busier. The first customers are finishing their purchases. The first travelers are beginning their journeys. And the smell of fresh bread continues drifting through the streets. Soon, the sun will rise higher. The shadows will become shorter. The city will grow louder. And the foods of the marketplace will become more varied. There will be sweet things. There will be roasted things. There will be foods prepared quickly for hungry workers and travelers. There will be little treats that are not necessary for survival, but are enjoyed simply because they taste good. And perhaps that is where the ancient world begins to feel surprisingly familiar. Bread, cheese, and the first travelers. The morning has fully arrived now. The last traces of darkness have disappeared from the sky, and the ancient Persian city is beginning to settle into its daily rhythm. The coolness of dawn still lingers in the shaded streets, but above the rooftops, the sunlight is already becoming warm. The marketplace is awake. Not loudly, not all at once, but gradually. A wooden door opens. A merchant arranges his baskets. A donkey walks slowly between the stalls. Someone calls to a passing customer. Somewhere nearby, an oven crackles. And beneath all these small sounds is the unmistakable smell of fresh bread. The baker has been working since before sunrise. His hands are covered lightly with flour, and the front of his clothing carries the marks of another morning spent beside the oven. He places another piece of bread onto a wooden board and watches as a customer approaches. The customer is a traveler. He has been preparing to leave the city since early morning. His belongings are packed simply. A cloth bundle rests beside him, and his animal waits patiently nearby. The road ahead may take him far beyond the city walls, perhaps toward another settlement, another market, or another caravan station. Before leaving, however, he needs food. Not a feast. Just something dependable. The traveler buys bread. Perhaps he also buys a little cheese. The cheese is wrapped carefully, and the bread is placed beside it. That may be enough for several hours. There is something wonderfully simple about such a meal. Bread and cheese. A combination that requires no elaborate table. No silver plates. No palace kitchen. Just two foods placed together. The traveler can eat them while resting beside the road. He can share them with a companion. Or he can save them until hunger becomes stronger. For someone traveling across the ancient Persian world, convenience mattered. The roads could be long. The weather could be difficult. There might be stretches where no market was available. A traveler needed foods that could survive the journey. And so the small foods of everyday life became important companions. Bread was one. Dried fruit was another. Dates were especially valuable. They were sweet naturally, and they could be carried easily. Imagine a small pouch filled with dates. It would not be heavy. It would not take much space. And when hunger appeared, a traveler could simply reach inside and take one. There was no cooking. No preparation. Just food. The same might be true of nuts. Almonds and other nuts could provide something satisfying in a small quantity. They were easy to store and useful on journeys. A handful could be eaten slowly. Perhaps two travelers would sit together beneath a tree, breaking bread and sharing nuts while their animals rested nearby. The road would stretch quietly before them. There might be mountains in the distance. Perhaps fields. Perhaps dry hills. Perhaps a river somewhere beyond the horizon. The ancient Persian world was enormous, and the landscape changed constantly. But travelers carried familiar foods with them. Food gave them a small sense of home. A familiar piece of bread could be comforting when everything else around you was unfamiliar. A sweet date could remind someone of an orchard. A piece of cheese could make a simple meal feel complete. And perhaps that is one reason these foods remained so useful. They were not merely convenient. They were familiar. Now return to the marketplace. The baker has sold another batch of bread. The wooden board is almost empty. He turns toward the oven. There is more dough waiting. The work continues. This was not a world where bread appeared magically on a supermarket shelf. Someone had to grow the grain. Someone had to harvest it. Someone had to grind it. Someone had to prepare the flour. Someone had to knead the dough. Someone had to heat the oven. And someone had to bake it. Behind every simple piece of bread was a chain of human effort. Yet for the person eating it, the experience could be wonderfully uncomplicated. You tear off a piece. You taste it. The bread is warm. Perhaps the outside is slightly crisp. The inside is soft. You add a little cheese. And suddenly you have a meal. Maybe it is not luxurious. But after walking beneath the sun, carrying goods, or working since sunrise, it might taste perfect. This is one of the things we sometimes forget when imagining ancient history. Ordinary people did not spend their entire lives surrounded by grand historical events. Most days were much quieter. They woke. They worked. They ate. They talked. They rested. They watched the seasons change. And they enjoyed small pleasures. Food was one of those pleasures. The morning market provides many of them. A seller has arranged dates in a shallow basket. Another has nuts. Someone else has dried fruits. There are herbs and other ingredients. And there are small foods prepared for people who do not want to cook. The concept of street food is also much older than modern cities. Whenever people gather in markets, at roadsides, near workshops, or around busy public places, someone eventually discovers that selling ready-to-eat food can be useful. The ancient Persian marketplace was no exception. People came and went throughout the day. Merchants needed food. Workers needed food. Travelers needed food. And food sellers were there to meet that need. Perhaps a person could stop briefly, exchange a few coins, and continue with the day. That was important. Life did not always allow people to sit at home for every meal. The marketplace itself could become a place of eating. A person might stand beneath an awning. Another might sit on a low stool. Friends might gather beside a wall. Travelers might rest near their animals. And while they talked, they could eat something simple. Bread, cheese, dates, nuts, perhaps a sweet treat, perhaps something roasted over a small fire. The food did not have to be complicated. It only had to be satisfying. The sunlight continues to spread through the market. Now the cool shadows are beginning to disappear. The temperature rises slowly. The baker's face is warm from the oven. Customers become more numerous. The quiet morning is turning into the busier part of the day. But the traveler is ready. He has his bread. He has his cheese. Perhaps a small pouch of dates hangs from his belongings. He checks the straps. His animal shifts patiently. Then he begins to leave. For a moment, he looks back toward the city. Behind him are the market stalls, the bakeries, the homes, and the people beginning another ordinary day. Ahead is the road. He walks slowly at first. The city sounds become quieter behind him. Soon, the market disappears from view. The traveler follows the road beneath the growing sunlight. Perhaps he will stop later beneath a tree. Perhaps he will share his food with another traveler. Perhaps he will eat alone. There is no need to imagine anything dramatic. The road itself is enough. Dust rises softly beneath his feet. The animal walks steadily. The distant landscape shimmers in the heat. And in his small bundle is enough food to keep him comfortable for a while. A piece of bread, some cheese, a few dates, perhaps some nuts. Simple things, but useful things. And this is where the ancient idea of a snack begins to feel particularly familiar. Modern people carry sandwiches, biscuits, fruit, nuts, and other small foods when traveling. Ancient travelers did much the same, using the ingredients and preservation methods available to them. The packaging was different. The roads were different. The distances were different. But the purpose was almost identical. You know you will become hungry. So you bring something to eat. And sometimes you bring something not only because you need it, but because you enjoy it. The traveler continues down the road. Behind him, the city is becoming smaller. Ahead, the landscape opens. The morning sun grows stronger. He finds a place beneath the shade of a tree and finally stops. His animal rests nearby. The traveler sits down. He unwraps the bread. The cheese is still cool. He takes a date from his pouch. For a moment, there is nothing else to do. No market to negotiate in. No road to hurry along. No work to complete. Just food and shade. He tears off a piece of bread. Adds a little cheese. then eats. The meal is quiet. Perhaps another traveler passes by and greets him. Perhaps they exchange a few words. Perhaps they simply continue in opposite directions. The world keeps moving. But under the shade, time seems slower. And perhaps that is what makes simple food so memorable. It is often connected to moments of rest. A piece of bread after hard work. A date beneath a tree. Nuts shared beside a fire. Something sweet at the end of an ordinary day. Food becomes part of the memory. Not because it was expensive, but because of where and when it was eaten. Back in the city, the market has become much busier. The baker is still working. The sellers of dates and nuts are speaking with customers. Workers are moving through the streets. Travelers are coming and going. And as the day continues, new smells begin to rise from the market. Roasted foods. Sweet foods. Spiced foods. Warm foods cooked over charcoal. The simple breakfast of bread and cheese belongs to the cool morning. Soon, the city will move into the hotter hours. People will look for shade. The streets will change. And the food sold in the marketplace will change with them. But before we leave this morning behind, it is worth remembering something. Ancient Persian food was not only about royal banquets and magnificent dishes. It was also about small things. A piece of bread. Bread, cheese, and the first travelers. The morning has fully arrived now. The last traces of darkness have disappeared from the sky, and the ancient Persian city is beginning to settle into its daily rhythm. The coolness of dawn still lingers in the shaded streets, but above the rooftops, the sunlight is already becoming warm. The marketplace is awake. Not loudly, not all at once, but gradually. A wooden door opens. A merchant arranges his baskets. A donkey walks slowly between the stalls. Someone calls to a passing customer. Somewhere nearby, an oven crackles. And beneath all these small sounds is the unmistakable smell of fresh bread. The baker has been working since before sunrise. His hands are covered lightly with flour, and the front of his clothing carries the marks of another morning spent beside the oven. He places another piece of bread onto a wooden board and watches as a customer approaches. The customer is a traveler. He has been preparing to leave the city since early morning. His belongings are packed simply. A cloth bundle rests beside him, and his animal waits patiently nearby. The road ahead may take him far beyond the city walls, perhaps toward another settlement, another market, or another caravan station. Before leaving, however, he needs food. Not a feast. Just something dependable. The traveler buys bread. Perhaps he also buys a little cheese. The cheese is wrapped carefully, and the bread is placed beside it. That may be enough for several hours. There is something wonderfully simple about such a meal. Bread and cheese. A combination that requires no elaborate table. No silver plates. No palace kitchen. Just two foods placed together. The traveler can eat them while resting beside the road. He can share them with a companion. Or he can save them until hunger becomes stronger. For someone traveling across the ancient Persian world, convenience mattered. The roads could be long. The weather could be difficult. There might be stretches where no market was available. A traveler needed foods that could survive the journey. And so the small foods of everyday life became important companions. Bread was one. Dried fruit was another. Dates were especially valuable. They were sweet naturally, and they could be carried easily. Imagine a small pouch filled with dates. It would not be heavy. It would not take much space. And when hunger appeared, a traveler could simply reach inside and take one. There was no cooking, no preparation, just food. The same might be true of nuts. Almonds and other nuts could provide something satisfying in a small quantity. They were easy to store and useful on journeys. A handful could be eaten slowly. Perhaps two travelers would sit together beneath a tree, breaking bread and sharing nuts while their animals rested nearby. The road would stretch quietly before them. There might be mountains in the distance. Perhaps fields. Perhaps dry hills. Perhaps a river somewhere beyond the horizon. The ancient Persian world was enormous, and the landscape changed constantly. But travelers carried familiar foods with them. Food gave them a small sense of home. A familiar piece of bread could be comforting when everything else around you was unfamiliar. A sweet date could remind someone of an orchard. A piece of cheese could make a simple meal feel complete. And perhaps that is one reason these foods remained so useful. They were not merely convenient. They were familiar. Now return to the marketplace. The baker has sold another batch of bread. The wooden board is almost empty. He turns toward the oven. There is more dough waiting. The work continues. This was not a world where bread appeared magically on a supermarket shelf. Someone had to grow the grain. Someone had to harvest it. Someone had to grind it. Someone had to prepare the flour. Someone had to knead the dough. Someone had to heat the oven. And someone had to bake it. Behind every simple piece of bread was a chain of human effort. Yet for the person eating it, the experience could be wonderfully uncomplicated. You tear off a piece. You taste it. The bread is warm. Perhaps the outside is slightly crisp. The inside is soft. You add a little cheese. And suddenly you have a meal. Maybe it is not luxurious. But after walking beneath the sun, carrying goods, or working since sunrise, it might taste perfect. This is one of the things we sometimes forget when imagining ancient history. Ordinary people did not spend their entire lives surrounded by grand historical events. Most days were much quieter. They woke. They worked. They ate. They talked. They rested. They watched the seasons change. And they enjoyed small pleasures. Food was one of those pleasures. The morning market provides many of them. A seller has arranged dates in a shallow basket. Another has nuts. Someone else has dried fruits. There are herbs and other ingredients. And there are small foods prepared for people who do not want to cook. The concept of street food is also much older than modern cities. Whenever people gather in markets, at roadsides, near workshops, or around busy public places, someone eventually discovers that selling ready-to-eat food can be useful. The ancient Persian marketplace was no exception. People came and went throughout the day. Merchants needed food. Workers needed food. Travelers needed food. And food sellers were there to meet that need. Perhaps a person could stop briefly, exchange a few coins, and continue with the day. That was important. Life did not always allow people to sit at home for every meal. The marketplace itself could become a place of eating. A person might stand beneath an awning. Another might sit on a low stool. Friends might gather beside a wall. Travelers might rest near their animals. And while they talked, they could eat something simple. Bread. Cheese. Dates. Nuts. Perhaps a sweet treat. Perhaps something roasted over a small fire. The food did not have to be complicated. It only had to be satisfying. The sunlight continues to spread through the market. Now the cool shadows are beginning to disappear. The temperature rises slowly. The baker's face is warm from the oven. Customers become more numerous. The quiet morning is turning into the busier part of the day. But the traveler is ready. He has his bread. He has his cheese. Perhaps a small pouch of dates hangs from his belongings. He checks the straps. His animal shifts patiently. Then he begins to leave. For a moment, he looks back toward the city. Behind him are the market stalls, the bakeries, the homes, and the people beginning another ordinary day. Ahead is the road. He walks slowly at first. The city sounds become quieter behind him. Soon, the market disappears from view. The traveler follows the road beneath the growing sunlight. Perhaps he will stop later beneath a tree. Perhaps he will share his food with another traveler. Perhaps he will eat alone. There is no need to imagine anything dramatic. The road itself is enough. Dust rises softly beneath his feet. The animal walks steadily. The distant landscape shimmers in the heat. And in his small bundle is enough food to keep him comfortable for a while. A piece of bread. Some cheese. A few dates. Perhaps some nuts. Simple things. But useful things. And this is where the ancient idea of a snack begins to feel particularly familiar. Modern people carry sandwiches, biscuits, fruit, nuts, and other small foods when traveling. Ancient travelers did much the same, using the ingredients and preservation methods available to them. The packaging was different. The roads were different. The distances were different. But the purpose was almost identical. You know you will become hungry. So you bring something to eat. And sometimes you bring something not only because you need it, but because you enjoy it. The traveler continues down the road. Behind him, the city is becoming smaller. Ahead, the landscape opens. The morning sun grows stronger. He finds a place beneath the shade of a tree and finally stops. His animal rests nearby. The traveler sits down. He unwraps the bread. The cheese is still cool. He takes a date from his pouch. For a moment, there is nothing else to do. No market to negotiate in. No road to hurry along. No work to complete. Just food and shade. He tears off a piece of bread. Adds a little cheese. Then eats. The meal is quiet. Perhaps another traveler passes by and greets him. Perhaps they exchange a few words. Perhaps they simply continue in opposite directions. The world keeps moving. But under the shade, time seems slower. And perhaps that is what makes simple food so memorable. It is often connected to moments of rest. A piece of bread after hard work. A date beneath a tree. Nuts shared beside a fire. Something sweet at the end of an ordinary day. Food becomes part of the memory. Not because it was expensive, but because of where and when it was eaten. Back in the city, the market has become much busier. The baker is still working. The sellers of dates and nuts are speaking with customers. Workers are moving through the streets. Travelers are coming and going. And as the day continues, new smells begin to rise from the market. Roasted foods. Sweet foods. Spiced foods. Warm foods cooked over charcoal. The simple breakfast of bread and cheese belongs to the cool morning. Soon, the city will move into the hotter hours. People will look for shade. The streets will change. And the food sold in the marketplace will change with them. But before we leave this morning behind, it is worth remembering something. Ancient Persian food was not only about royal banquets and magnificent dishes. It was also about small things. A piece of bread. Snacks for workers and travelers. By the time the sun had climbed higher above the ancient Persian city, the gentle coolness of morning had begun to disappear. The streets were warmer now. The shadows beneath the walls had become shorter, and the quiet rhythm of dawn had slowly transformed into the steady movement of an ordinary working day. The market was fully awake. Merchants stood beside their goods. Travelers came through the gates. Donkeys carried baskets along narrow streets. Workers moved from one place to another, carrying tools, clay vessels, bundles of goods, and materials for construction. And among all these people were those who had already become hungry again. For some, breakfast had been many hours ago. For others, there had been no proper breakfast at all. Perhaps they had left home before sunrise. Perhaps they had been working since the first light. Perhaps they had simply not had enough food to keep them comfortable through the morning. And so the marketplace offered something very useful. A small meal. A quick bite. Something that could be eaten without returning home. In the modern world, we might call such food a snack. In ancient Persia, it was simply food. There was no need for a special word. If you were hungry, you ate. And if you were working far from home, you looked for something easy to carry and easy to enjoy. A worker might approach a bread seller and purchase a warm piece of flatbread. Another might buy a few dates. Someone else might have a handful of nuts tucked inside a cloth pouch. A traveler might purchase enough bread and dried fruit to last until the next stopping place. These foods were simple, but their simplicity was exactly what made them useful. The sun continued rising. Near one of the market entrances, a group of laborers had stopped beneath the shade of a wall. Their morning work had been heavy. They had been carrying materials since early in the day, and their clothes were already marked by dust. One man sat down. Another leaned against the wall. A third opened a small cloth bundle. Inside was bread. He broke it into pieces and passed some around. There was no elaborate table. No collection of dishes. Just bread being shared between tired people. Someone produced a few dates. Another had cheese. For a while, they ate quietly. The conversation was slow. There was no reason to hurry. The work would still be waiting when they finished. This kind of meal would have been practical in a world where physical work was part of almost everyone's life. People walked more. People carried more. Many tasks required physical strength. And food needed to provide energy without making everything unnecessarily complicated. Bread was particularly useful because it could be prepared in advance and carried easily. Dried fruits had another advantage. They did not spoil as quickly as fresh fruit. Dates could be stored and transported. Nuts could also travel well. Cheese required more care, but it could still accompany bread and make a simple meal more satisfying. And then there were sweet foods. Sweetness was valuable in the ancient world. Sugar, as we know it today, was not an everyday ingredient available to everyone. Instead, sweetness often came from natural sources such as dates, fruits, and honey. Honey was especially precious. It could be used to sweeten foods and drinks, and a little could transform something plain into something special. Imagine a worker at the end of a long morning. He has eaten bread. He has drunk water. And then someone offers him a small taste of honey. It is only a little. But after hours of work, that sweetness might feel wonderfully luxurious. This is something people have understood for thousands of years. A small treat can feel much more special when you have earned it. The marketplace continues around them. Voices rise and fall. Animals pass through. A merchant negotiates with a customer. A child watches a food seller carefully. The smell of warm bread moves through the air. Somewhere nearby, something is roasting over charcoal. Smoke rises slowly. The worker looks toward it. Perhaps he has enough food already. Perhaps he decides to buy something else. There is no need to know exactly what every ancient Persian street seller prepared. The surviving evidence does not give us a complete menu of ancient Persian snacks, and food traditions varied enormously across the empire. But we can understand the basic pattern. People had grains. They had fruits. They had dates. They had nuts. They had dairy products. They had herbs and spices. They had honey. They had various ways of roasting, baking, boiling, and cooking foods. And wherever people gathered, some of those foods could be prepared for immediate eating. This is the important part. Ancient Persia was not a world without convenience. It simply had a different kind of convenience. A person could buy something ready to eat from a seller rather than preparing every bite at home. A traveler could purchase food along the road. A worker could eat something during a break. A merchant could keep dried foods nearby. The technology was different. The basic need was the same. Now imagine leaving the busy market and walking toward one of the roads leading out of the city. The heat is stronger here. There is less shade. The road stretches toward the horizon. A small group of travelers has stopped beneath an awning. They have been traveling since morning. Their animals are tired. The travelers are tired too. One of them opens a bag. Inside are dried fruits. Another has nuts. A third carries bread. They place everything together. There is something beautiful about shared food on a long journey. Each person may have brought something different. One has dates. Another has bread. Another has cheese. Together, these separate foods become a meal. No single person had to provide everything. They simply share what they have. The travelers sit quietly. One takes a piece of bread. Another offers a date. Someone pours water. The conversation turns toward the road ahead. How far remains? Where will they stop tonight? Will there be water? Will the weather remain clear? These are ordinary questions. But the food makes the waiting easier. For a few minutes, the road can be forgotten. There is shade. There is water. There is food. There is companionship. And then, eventually, they continue. This kind of eating would have been repeated countless times throughout the Persian world. On roads. Near workshops. In marketplaces. Beside farms. Outside city gates. Under trees. In courtyards. Food did not always require a dining room. Sometimes the world itself became the dining room. A shaded wall could be enough. A patch of grass could be enough. A wooden bench could be enough. A folded cloth could become a place to sit. And a piece of bread could become the meal. As the afternoon approaches, the city begins to change again. The heat becomes heavier. People seek shade. Some sellers pull cloth coverings across their stalls. Others continue working. The market remains active, but the rhythm is slower. There is less rushing. More resting. A person who has been working since dawn may stop for another small bite. Perhaps a few dates. Perhaps some nuts. Perhaps bread left over from the morning. This is where the idea of casual food becomes especially familiar. A person does not necessarily sit down for a large meal. They simply eat something. A little food now. A little more later. Enough to keep going. And perhaps this was common because daily life demanded flexibility. People did not always have the luxury of fixed meal times. A merchant could be negotiating when hunger arrived. A farmer could be working in a field. A traveler could be halfway between two settlements. A craftsman could be working at a workshop. A soldier could be on the road. Food had to fit around life. And so portable foods became valuable. Bread could be wrapped. Dates could be carried. Nuts could be stored. Dried fruits could travel. These were ancient forms of convenience food. Not packaged. Not processed in the modern industrial sense. But convenient. And sometimes, when the opportunity came, people probably made them more enjoyable. Bread could be combined with cheese. Dates could be eaten with nuts. Honey could add sweetness. Fresh herbs could add flavor. Spices could make simple foods more interesting. The ancient Persian world was connected by trade, and ingredients traveled enormous distances. Merchants carried goods across mountains, plains, deserts, and river valleys. The great roads of the empire were not merely routes for armies and official messengers. They were also pathways for food, ingredients, and culinary ideas. A traveler could encounter unfamiliar flavors. A merchant could bring something home. A food seller could experiment. A household could adopt a new combination. Slowly, tastes moved from one place to another. The result was a food culture that could be incredibly varied. Yet beneath the variety remained a foundation of simple ingredients. Grain, fruit, nuts, dairy, honey, herbs. These could be combined in countless ways. And because the ingredients were familiar, they could be transformed into food suitable for almost every part of the day. Breakfast. A working snack. A travel meal. An evening treat. A shared bite between friends. The sun is beginning to soften now. The strongest heat of the afternoon is passing. The market has become more comfortable. The workers who rested earlier have returned to their tasks. The travelers continue along their roads. And the food sellers begin thinking about the evening. Some will prepare more bread. Others will bring out different foods. Honey, fruits, and ancient treats. The evening had settled gently over the ancient Persian marketplace. The strongest heat of the day was gone now, and the stone walls that had been bright beneath the afternoon sun were slowly becoming cool again. Small lamps flickered beneath awnings. The voices of merchants softened as the market moved toward its quieter hours. Yet the smells of food remained. Bread, roasted nuts, fresh herbs, dried fruits, and somewhere nearby, the unmistakable sweetness of honey. Honey occupied a special place in the ancient world. Unlike modern refined sugar, which can be found almost everywhere today, honey was a natural source of sweetness that required careful work to obtain. Bees had to gather nectar, honey had to be collected, and the precious substance had to be stored safely. So when honey appeared at a table, it could make an ordinary food feel special. A little honey could transform bread. It could sweeten fruit. It could become part of a dessert. It could be used in drinks or preparations. And it could simply be enjoyed for its sweetness. Imagine a small clay vessel sitting on a merchant's table. Inside is golden honey. The surface catches the light from an oil lamp. It looks almost like liquid sunlight. A customer approaches. The merchant opens the vessel. For a moment, the sweet smell becomes stronger. The customer buys a small amount. Perhaps it will be taken home. Perhaps it will be used for a family meal. Perhaps someone will dip a piece of bread into it the next morning. Nothing about the moment is dramatic. But it is exactly these little moments that make everyday history interesting. People in the ancient world wanted sweetness just as people do now. They simply found it in different ways. Dates were naturally sweet. Fruits offered seasonal sweetness. Honey provided another source. Dried fruits became sweeter and more concentrated as their water content disappeared. Together, these ingredients could create small treats without requiring the elaborate desserts we might imagine today. A handful of dried fruit could be a snack. A piece of bread with honey could become a sweet breakfast. Dates could be eaten after a meal. Nuts could be combined with fruit. And honey could bring all of these simple ingredients together. The marketplace slowly grows quieter. A fruit seller begins arranging what remains. Some fresh fruits will not wait forever. Others can be dried and preserved. This was one of the great advantages of drying. Fruit that might spoil quickly could become something that lasted much longer. The process changed the texture. It changed the taste. And it made the fruit easier to transport. For travelers, this was particularly useful. Imagine a caravan preparing to leave the city. The animals are being loaded. Water containers are checked. Cloth bundles are tied securely. A merchant counts his belongings. Before leaving, he visits the market. He needs food for the road. He buys bread. He buys dates. And perhaps he buys dried fruit. The dried fruit is light. It can be placed into a small pouch. It does not require cooking. It can be eaten while traveling. The merchant knows the journey will be long. There may be no market tomorrow. Perhaps there will be a stopping place. Perhaps not. So food that can survive the road is valuable. This is one reason preservation mattered so much in ancient life. People had to think ahead. If fruit was abundant during one season, some of it could be preserved for later. If grain was harvested, it could be stored. If nuts were available, they could be kept. If dates were plentiful, they could be dried. Food was connected to time. A harvest was not simply about eating what was available today. It was also about preparing for tomorrow. And because preserved foods were so useful, they naturally became part of travel and everyday snacking. A person did not have to wait until dinner. They could take something from a small pouch and eat it whenever hunger arrived. This was particularly useful for people whose days were unpredictable. A messenger could not always stop at a household. A shepherd could spend hours away from home. A farmer might remain in the fields. A craftsman could become absorbed in work. A traveler might cover many miles before sunset. Food that could travel with them made life easier. And sometimes, that food could be delicious. Consider dried fruit. When fruit loses water, its natural sweetness becomes concentrated. The result is small but intense. A single piece can have much more sweetness than its size suggests. For someone living in an ancient world where sweet foods were not constantly available, this could be a wonderful little pleasure. Perhaps a child received a piece after finishing a task. Perhaps two friends shared a small handful. Perhaps a traveler saved the sweetest pieces for the end of the journey. Food can create little rituals. The first bite. The last bite. The piece you save. The piece you share. These habits may never appear in official historical records, but they are part of what it means to live. Now imagine a Persian household in the evening. The family has finished the main part of the meal. The dishes are simple. Bread has been shared. Other foods have been eaten. The fire has begun to settle. Someone brings out a small bowl. Inside are dates and dried fruits. A little honey sits in another vessel. The family begins talking. The day is over. There is nowhere urgent to go. The children are tired. The older members of the household sit comfortably. Someone takes a date. Someone reaches for dried fruit. A little honey is spread onto bread. The conversation continues. This is not a feast. There are no musicians. No royal guests. No elaborate decorations. Just a family at the end of an ordinary day. And perhaps that is more representative of ancient life than the grand scenes we usually imagine. Most people lived in ordinary homes. They ate ordinary food. They worked ordinary jobs. They experienced ordinary joys. A little sweetness after a long day could be enough. Outside, the city is becoming quieter. The marketplace still has a few customers. A traveler stops at a stall. A merchant purchases a final bundle of dried fruit. A baker sells the last pieces of bread. A young man buys a handful of nuts. The sellers are preparing to close. Oil lamps flicker in the evening breeze. The streets smell faintly of smoke and warm food. And somewhere in the darkness, someone is still preparing a small treat. Perhaps honey is being warmed. Perhaps fruit is being arranged. Perhaps nuts are being roasted. The sounds are soft. Crackling fire. Quiet conversation. A wooden bowl being placed on a table. Footsteps on the street. The ancient city is settling down. Yet food continues to connect people. It always has. A sweet thing can be offered as a gift. A bowl can be placed in the center of a table. A traveler can share his dates. A merchant can exchange fruit for another product. A child can be given a small treat. Even when food is simple, the act of sharing it can make it meaningful. There is also something interesting about the word treat. A treat is not necessarily expensive. It is simply something that feels a little special. In ancient Persia, a treat might have been something as simple as honey, or a particularly sweet date, or dried fruit saved from the harvest, or bread made especially fresh. The idea is ancient. When something is less common, we appreciate it more. Today, sweetness surrounds us. We can choose from thousands of products. But for an ancient person, natural sweetness could feel precious. Honey was not poured casually over everything. Dates were not merely another packaged product. Dried fruits were connected to seasons and harvests. And this made them meaningful. Imagine a farmer after harvest. The fruit has been collected. Some is eaten fresh. Some is given away. Some is sold. Some is carefully dried. The farmer knows that months later, when the landscape is different, those preserved fruits may still be available. A piece of dried fruit can therefore carry a little piece of summer into another season. It is food, but it is also preservation. A reminder of abundance during a quieter time. The same idea applies to dates. When the harvest is good, people can prepare supplies for the future. These foods become part of household storage. And because they are stored, they can also become part of travel. One person eats them at home. Another carries them across the empire. A third buys them at a market. The same small fruit can move through many hands. The Persian world was connected by roads and trade. Goods moved between regions. People moved between cities. Caravans crossed long distances. And food moved with them. The ingredients of everyday life were therefore not always local. A market could bring together foods from different landscapes. Fresh fruits from fertile regions. Dates from warmer areas. Nuts from upland regions. Grains from agricultural fields. Honey from beekeepers. Spices and other ingredients from distant trade routes. The marketplace became a meeting place for flavors, and the people who lived there could choose what they wanted. Perhaps someone preferred dates. Someone else preferred nuts. Another loved dried fruit. Another enjoyed bread with honey. There was no single ancient Persian snack. There were countless small possibilities. That variety is what makes the subject so fascinating. And it reminds us that ancient people were not simply eating whatever was placed before them. They had preferences. They enjoyed certain flavors. They chose foods according to season, availability, price, and personal taste. What a traveler carried. The night had passed quietly over the ancient Persian city. Now, once again, the darkness was beginning to fade. Beyond the walls, the eastern horizon had taken on a faint silver color. The stars were disappearing one by one, and the cool air of the early morning rested gently over the roads. Inside a small resting place near the city gate, a traveler was already awake. He did not rise suddenly. There was no alarm calling him from sleep. Instead, he opened his eyes slowly and listened. The world was still quiet. A distant animal made a soft sound. Someone coughed near the fire. A few footsteps moved across the packed earth. The traveler sat up and looked toward the entrance. Soon, the road would begin to fill again. Before leaving, however, he needed to prepare his food. Travel in the ancient Persian world could be long and tiring. Roads connected settlements, markets, administrative centers, farms, and distant regions of the empire. Some journeys lasted only part of a day. Others continued for many days. A traveler therefore had to think carefully about what he carried. Water was essential. Clothing had to be packed. Personal belongings had to be protected. And food had to be chosen wisely. There was little point carrying something that would spoil quickly. There was little use taking food that was too heavy. And there was certainly no reason to carry something that required an elaborate kitchen when the road offered little opportunity for cooking. Travel food needed to be practical. Bread was one of the easiest choices. It could be prepared before departure and wrapped in cloth. It was filling. It could be eaten alone. And it could be combined with other foods. The traveler reaches into his bundle. There is bread inside. Not much. Enough for the beginning of the journey. Beside it is a small pouch. Inside are dates. He touches them with his fingers, checking that they are still safely packed. There are also a few nuts. Perhaps some dried fruit. Nothing elaborate. But together, these foods could provide comfort during the hours ahead. He closes the pouch. Then he prepares to leave. Outside, the first light of morning has reached the road. The city gate is beginning to open. Merchants are preparing their animals. A small caravan gathers nearby. People speak quietly as they check their belongings. The traveler steps outside. The air is still cool. He looks back toward the city. For a moment, he sees the familiar shapes of rooftops and walls in the soft morning light. Then he turns toward the road. His journey begins. The first part is easy. The road passes through cultivated land. Fields stretch into the distance. Trees stand beside irrigation channels. The morning air smells faintly of earth and vegetation. The traveler walks steadily. He does not need to hurry. The sun is still low. There is plenty of time before the heat becomes uncomfortable. After some distance, he stops beneath a tree. He has not traveled far enough to need a proper meal, but he feels a little hungry. This is exactly the moment when his small food pouch becomes useful. He opens it. Inside are the dates. He takes one. It is small, but the sweetness immediately changes the feeling of the morning. He eats slowly. Then he takes another. A little later, he breaks off a piece of bread. The meal is simple. Yet sitting beneath the tree, with the road stretching quietly ahead, it feels satisfying. There is no table. No bowl. No elaborate preparation. Just food, shade, and a few peaceful minutes. This was one of the great advantages of food such as dates and nuts. They could be eaten almost anywhere. A traveler did not need to find a kitchen. He did not need to light a fire. He could simply stop and eat. And when he was ready, he could continue. The traveler wraps the remaining bread. He closes the pouch. Then he begins walking again. As the morning progresses, the landscape changes. The cultivated fields become less frequent. The road rises gently. Far away, hills appear beneath the brightening sky. The sun grows stronger. The traveler begins to understand why food had to be chosen carefully. A long journey could be unpredictable. Perhaps the next settlement would be closer than expected. Perhaps it would be farther. Perhaps a caravan would be delayed. Perhaps weather would slow everyone down. Food that could remain useful was therefore extremely valuable. Dried foods were particularly practical. Fresh fruit was wonderful when available, but it could bruise or spoil. Dried fruit was different. Its reduced moisture made it much easier to preserve. The same principle applied to other foods. Grain could be stored. Nuts could be kept. Dates could be dried. Certain dairy products could be preserved in ways suitable for travel. People understood preservation because their lives depended upon it. They had to plan for seasons. They had to prepare for journeys. They had to make harvests last. The modern idea of simply buying more food whenever we need it was impossible. If you finished your food on the road, there might not be another shop nearby. So travelers carried what they could. And this meant that portable foods were not merely snacks. They could be essential. The traveler continues. Around midday, he meets another group on the road. They are traveling in the same direction. The groups exchange greetings. One of the travelers carries a basket. Another has a cloth bundle. They stop together beneath the shade of a low wall. Everyone is tired from the morning journey. The conversation begins. Where have you come from? Where are you going? How far is the next stopping place? Will there be water? These questions are practical. But soon, food appears. The traveler opens his pouch. He has dates. Another person has nuts. Someone else carries a little dried fruit. One person has bread. The food is placed together. It is not a feast, but it becomes a shared meal. This kind of sharing could make travel easier. The road could be lonely. A stranger could become a companion simply because both were heading in the same direction. Food created an easy reason to sit together. The travelers eat slowly. The heat of midday is strong now. They remain beneath the shade. No one wants to hurry. The dates are passed around. The nuts are shared. Bread is broken into pieces. Someone drinks water. For a little while, the road disappears from their minds. there is only shade, food, and conversation. This is one of the quiet pleasures of travel. Not the destination, not the excitement, but the little pauses along the way. A cool breeze, a shaded place, a mouthful of food, a friendly voice, a few moments of rest. Then, eventually, the journey continues. The traveler packs his food again. There are fewer dates now. The bread is smaller. The pouch of nuts is lighter. But there is still enough. He stands. The group begins moving. The road stretches ahead beneath the afternoon sun. The landscape becomes drier. Dust rises around their feet. The traveler walks quietly. Perhaps he is thinking about the destination. Perhaps he is thinking about the meal waiting at the end of the journey. Or perhaps he is thinking about nothing at all. Sometimes walking for a long time makes the mind quiet. The rhythm becomes simple. Step, step, step. The animal walks beside him. The road continues. The sun moves slowly across the sky. And eventually, hunger returns. The traveler stops again. He reaches for another date. This time he eats only one. He wants to save the rest. That is another part of traveling with food. You must think ahead. If you eat everything too early, you may regret it later. A traveler learns to measure his supplies. One date now. Another later. A piece of bread at midday. Perhaps another in the evening. The food becomes part of the journey's rhythm. It marks time. It marks distance. It marks rest. This is very different from modern snacking, where food can be available almost constantly. For the ancient traveler, every piece mattered. There was no guarantee of another. So even a simple date could feel valuable. The traveler looks toward the horizon. The sun is beginning to descend. The air is becoming cooler. In the distance, he can see the outline of another settlement. Perhaps he will reach it before dark. Perhaps there will be an inn or resting place. Perhaps there will be a market. And if there is a market, there will be fresh food. That thought is comforting. He continues walking. The road gradually becomes busier. Other travelers appear. A merchant leads animals loaded with goods. A family moves slowly together. A messenger passes quickly. Everyone has somewhere to go. And everyone needs food. At the edge of the settlement, the first smells begin to reach the traveler. Smoke. Bread. Roasted foods. Fruit. The traveler smiles. His small food pouch has served him well. But now he has reached another place where food can be purchased. He enters the settlement. The streets are beginning to glow with the warm light of late afternoon. A seller is arranging bread. Another has baskets of dates. A third is preparing something over a small fire. The traveler pauses. For a moment, he simply watches. He has spent hours on the road. Now he can rest. Perhaps he will buy fresh bread. Perhaps he will purchase more dates for tomorrow. Perhaps he will find cheese. Perhaps he will simply sit beneath an awning and enjoy a cool drink. The journey has taught him something simple. Food is not only about hunger. It is also about preparation. It is about knowing what to carry. It is about knowing what can survive the road. It is about sharing when someone else is hungry. The sweetness of the date. The afternoon light had begun to soften over the ancient Persian city. The hottest hours were slowly passing, and the deep shadows beneath the market awnings were becoming places of welcome. People who had spent much of the day working in the sun were beginning to slow their pace. Merchants sat for a few moments beside their goods. Travelers searched for shade. Children moved between the quieter parts of the market, watched carefully by their families. And among the many foods displayed throughout the marketplace, one seemed almost perfectly suited to the ancient world. The date. Small, sweet, easy to carry, and naturally preserved. Dates had a long history across the lands of the ancient Near East, and in the warmer regions of the Persian world, they could be an especially useful food. They could be eaten fresh when available, or dried and stored for longer periods. For someone living thousands of years ago, this was valuable. There were no refrigerators waiting quietly in the corner of a kitchen. There were no sealed plastic containers designed to keep food fresh for weeks. There were no supermarkets where fresh fruit could be purchased in every season. People had to work with nature. They had to understand the seasons. They had to preserve what they could. And dates were wonderfully suited to that world. Imagine a date palm standing at the edge of a settlement. Its long green leaves move gently in the warm air. Beneath it, the ground is dry and dusty. The tree has been growing beneath the sun, drawing water from the earth and producing clusters of fruit. When the dates mature, they become soft and sweet. Some are eaten soon after harvesting. Others are dried. And once dried, they become something remarkably convenient. A traveler can carry them. A worker can keep them nearby. A family can store them. A merchant can sell them in the market. A child can eat one simply because it is sweet. There is no complicated preparation. No cooking is necessary. The fruit itself is the treat. And perhaps that is why dates feel like such a natural ancient equivalent of a snack. They were small enough to eat casually, sweet enough to feel indulgent, and useful enough to become part of everyday life. Now imagine walking through the market again. The afternoon sun is lower. A woman sits beside a basket of dates. She has arranged them carefully. Some are dark. Some are golden brown. Some are soft and glossy. Others are firmer and more dried. The basket itself is simple, woven from natural fibers. There is no sign above the stall. No printed advertisement. The dates speak for themselves. A customer approaches. He looks at the fruit. He asks about the price. The seller answers. A small exchange takes place. Then a few dates are placed into a cloth. The customer carries them away. Perhaps he will eat them immediately. Perhaps he will save them for the journey home. Perhaps he will share them with his family. The transaction is ordinary. But for the seller, it is part of a living trade. For the customer, it is a small pleasure. And for us, looking backward through thousands of years, it gives us a glimpse into the rhythm of everyday food. The ancient Persian diet was not simply made of great dishes served during celebrations. It also depended upon ingredients that could be stored and eaten throughout the day. Dates were one of those ingredients. They could provide sweetness when sweetness was not always easy to obtain. Honey was valuable too. Fresh fruit could be seasonal. But dried fruit could remain available for much longer. This meant that a person could enjoy sweetness without waiting for a special feast. And people have always enjoyed sweet things. That part of human nature does not seem to have changed very much. A person may work hard all day. They may eat bread and vegetables. They may drink water. But then someone offers them something sweet. Suddenly, the meal feels different. A small treat can brighten an ordinary day. In ancient Persia, dates could play that role. Perhaps a mother gave one to a child. Perhaps a worker ate one during a break. Perhaps friends shared a handful while sitting together. Perhaps a traveler kept a few in his pouch for the road. The date could be humble, but it could also be deeply satisfying. As evening approaches, the market becomes more colorful. The sunlight touches the tops of the stalls. Dust glows softly in the air. The smell of bread remains nearby, but now other aromas begin to appear. Roasted nuts, dried fruits, warm grains, herbs, smoke from small fires. And beneath the shade, the dates remain quietly displayed. A traveler stops. He has been walking since midday. His clothing carries the dust of the road. He is tired. His water is running low, although he expects to find more at the next stopping place. Before leaving the market, he decides to buy something small. He does not want a large meal. He simply wants something for the road. The seller gives him several dates. He places them into a small pouch. Then he continues walking. Later, when the road becomes quiet and the sun is beginning to disappear, he will sit beneath the evening sky and eat them. One at a time. Slowly. There is something almost meditative about eating dried fruit during a journey. You do not need a plate. You do not need a spoon. You do not even need to stop for very long. You simply take one. Taste the sweetness. Chew slowly. Then continue. Perhaps this is why portable foods have remained popular throughout history. They fit naturally into movement. People travel. People work. People walk. People wait. And hunger does not always wait for a proper meal. The ancient Persian roads connected distant places. Caravans crossed enormous stretches of land. Merchants transported valuable goods. Officials traveled between important centers. Families moved from one settlement to another. And ordinary people traveled for countless reasons. Along these journeys, food such as dates and dried fruits could be extremely useful. They were not heavy. They could be stored. And they offered energy. A traveler did not have to find a cooking fire every time hunger appeared. The food was already there. This was ancient convenience food. Not industrial. Not packaged. But practical. And sometimes, convenience is all we need from a snack. The traveler walks farther. The sun sinks lower. The road becomes cooler. He finally stops beside a small resting place. Other travelers are already there. Some have bread. One has nuts. Another carries dried fruit. They greet one another. No one has much. But everyone has something. A little food is placed in the center. Bread is broken. Nuts are shared. Dates are passed around. For a few minutes, strangers become companions. The conversation is quiet. Someone talks about the road ahead. Someone mentions the weather. Someone laughs softly about a difficult moment earlier in the journey. And while they talk, they eat. The dates disappear quickly. There is nothing luxurious about the meal. Yet it is warm and human. This is one of the most beautiful things about simple food. It can bring people together without requiring much. A person does not need a palace dining hall to share food. They only need something to share. A few dates can be enough. A piece of bread can be enough. A handful of nuts can be enough. The sky above them becomes darker. The first stars appear. The travelers finish eating. The road has become quiet. The smell of dust and dry earth fills the evening air. The date seller in the distant city is probably preparing to close her stall. Perhaps she still has a few baskets left. Perhaps she will store them carefully for tomorrow. Perhaps she will take some home for her own family. The market is changing. The afternoon customers have gone. Evening customers are arriving. The city is moving toward another part of its daily rhythm. And the date, so small and ordinary, continues to appear wherever people gather. At a household. At a market. On a road. At a workshop. Beside a field. Around a campfire. It is easy to overlook foods like this when imagining history. We tend to remember spectacular meals. We remember enormous tables. We remember royal kitchens. We imagine dishes prepared for kings and nobles. But everyday life was built from smaller things. A handful of grain. A loaf of bread. A bowl of fruit. A piece of cheese. A few dates. These were the foods that passed through ordinary hands. And because they were ordinary, they were everywhere. The date also had another quality that made it special. It could feel like a treat without requiring elaborate preparation. You did not need to turn it into a complicated dessert. The fruit itself was sweet. This made it especially valuable in a world where refined sweetness was much less accessible than it is today. Today, we can walk into almost any shop and find an enormous variety of sweet foods. Biscuits. Candies. Cakes. Chocolate. Sweet drinks. Pastries. In ancient Persia, the choices were different. Sweetness came from nature. Dates. Fruits. Honey. And combinations of these ingredients could create satisfying treats. Imagine a small bowl of dates placed on a household table. There is no bright packaging. No decoration. Just the fruit. Someone reaches for one. Then another person does the same. The bowl slowly becomes empty. It is an ordinary family moment. Perhaps conversation continues. Perhaps children are laughing. Perhaps an older family member is telling a story. The dates are simply there. And perhaps that is the true meaning of a snack. Something that quietly accompanies life. Something eaten while talking. Something enjoyed during rest. Eating beneath the shade. The evening had arrived gently. The last golden light of the sun rested on the walls of the small Persian settlement, turning the dust in the streets into a soft haze. After the long brightness of the afternoon, the cooler air felt almost like a gift. The traveler had finally stopped walking. For many hours, the road had carried him across dry ground and open countryside. His feet were tired, his clothes carried the dust of the journey, and his animal stood quietly nearby, grateful for the chance to rest. Now there was nowhere he needed to be. Not yet. The traveler sat beneath the shade of a simple awning outside a small food stall. A fresh piece of bread rested before him. He broke it slowly. The sound was soft. The inside of the bread was still warm. For a moment, he simply held the piece in his hand. After a long journey, even ordinary food could feel extraordinary. He took a bite. Then another. Nearby, someone was preparing dates. A small fire burned beside the stall. The flames moved gently in the evening breeze. There was a faint smell of roasted food in the air, mixed with smoke, bread, dust, and the cool scent of night approaching. The traveler closed his eyes for a moment. The road was behind him. The meal was in front of him. And the evening was quiet. This was one of the simplest pleasures available to travelers in the ancient world. Finding shade. Finding food. Finding a place to rest. The ancient Persian landscape could be demanding. The sun could be strong. The roads could be dusty. Distances could be long. And after hours of movement, the human body naturally wanted three things: water, food, rest. The traveler had carried his own supplies during the day: bread, dates, nuts, dried fruit. Those foods had been useful because they had traveled well. But now that he had reached a settlement, he could enjoy something fresher. The seller brought another piece of bread. Perhaps there was cheese as well. The traveler added a little to his meal. The combination was simple: bread and cheese. Nothing complicated. Yet the saltiness of the cheese worked beautifully with the warm bread. He ate slowly. There was no reason to hurry. The stall owner was also relaxing now. The busiest part of the evening had not yet arrived. A few people sat nearby. One man spoke quietly with another. Someone laughed. A child moved through the street and disappeared behind a doorway. A donkey stood patiently beside a wall. The sounds of the settlement were becoming softer. The traveler looked toward the street. The day had changed. In the morning, everyone seemed to be moving somewhere. Now people were returning home. Workers were carrying their tools. Merchants were finishing business. Travelers were looking for places to sleep. Families were gathering for evening meals. And food sellers were preparing for the final customers of the day. The traveler watched a woman approach the stall. She purchased several dates. The seller placed them carefully into a small container. The woman thanked him and continued toward home. A little later, another customer arrived. This person wanted bread. Then another wanted nuts. The food was simple. But the market remained alive because people needed it. Food was one of the great rhythms of daily life. Morning brought breakfast. Work brought hunger. Travel brought the need for portable food. Evening brought the desire for something warm and satisfying. And throughout the day, small snacks filled the spaces between meals. Ancient people did not need to invent the idea of snacking. They only needed to become hungry. And they did. The traveler finished his bread. He took a few dates from his pouch. They were the same dates he had carried earlier. There were only a few left. He looked at them for a moment. During the day, each one had been useful. One beneath a tree. Another during the journey. Another while resting beside the road. Now he ate the final one. The sweetness was familiar. But after a long day, it seemed even better. Perhaps this is one of the secrets of simple foods. Their taste changes with circumstances. A date eaten at home may be pleasant. A date eaten after hours of walking may be unforgettable. Bread eaten casually may seem ordinary. Bread eaten when you are exhausted can taste wonderful. Food is never only about ingredients. It is also about hunger, about place, about company, about memory. The traveler drinks some water. He sits quietly. Above him, the sky is turning darker. The first stars appear. The seller lights a small lamp. Its glow spreads across the stall. The bread looks golden in the warm light. The dates appear almost black. The nuts shine faintly. The night market is beginning. A few more travelers arrive. Some have been on the road all day. Others are local people finishing their work. The stall becomes slightly busier. The seller brings out more food. There may be roasted grains. There may be simple baked foods. There may be fruit. There may be sweet things made with honey. The exact dishes vary from place to place. Ancient Persia was not a single kitchen with a single menu. The empire stretched across many landscapes. Different regions had different crops. Different climates produced different fruits. Different communities had different traditions. But everywhere, people found ways to turn available ingredients into food. And wherever travelers gathered, there was a need for simple food. The traveler watches a group sit nearby. They have been walking together. One of them produces bread. Another brings nuts. Someone else has dried fruit. They place everything together. Again, the same pattern appears. Separate foods becoming a shared meal. One person tears the bread. Another passes the dates. Someone pours water. The conversation begins. At first, they talk about the road. Then they talk about the weather. Then perhaps they discuss where they will travel tomorrow. The food remains in the center. There is something deeply peaceful about watching strangers become companions through a shared meal. The world can feel very large when you are traveling. The road stretches ahead. The landscape changes. You may not know the people around you, but sharing food creates a small sense of belonging. Even a piece of bread can become an invitation. Here, take some. Eat with us. Rest for a while. You do not have to travel alone. The traveler listens to the conversation. He does not say much. He is tired. But he smiles occasionally. The evening is comfortable. The air has cooled. The fire burns steadily. The lamp flickers. Food is passed from hand to hand. And for a little while, nobody thinks about the distance ahead. This is another important part of ancient travel. The pauses. The stopping places. The shaded courtyards. The roadside fires. The meals eaten slowly. Without these moments, long journeys would have been much harder. Food provided energy, but rest provided something else. It gave the mind a chance to become quiet. The traveler leans back against the wall. He listens to the sound of the fire. Crackle. Pause. Crackle. A breeze passes through the street. The lamp flame moves gently. Someone nearby yawns. The conversation becomes softer. The evening is deepening. The traveler begins to feel sleepy. His body knows the journey is over for today. Tomorrow there will be another road. But tonight, there is only rest. Before going to sleep, he thinks about the food he will need tomorrow. Perhaps he should buy more dates. Perhaps more bread. Maybe a little dried fruit. The thought is practical. But it is also comforting. Tomorrow's journey is easier when food is already prepared. This was the quiet logic behind ancient portable foods. They made life more manageable. A person could prepare for uncertainty by carrying something simple. Food did not have to be complicated. It simply needed to survive. Bread could last for a while. Dates could last. Nuts could last. Dried fruits could last. And together they could accompany a person across a remarkable distance. The traveler finally stands. He thanks the stall owner. He collects his belongings. His animal is ready. The road will continue tomorrow. Before leaving, he looks once more at the food stall. The lamp is still burning. The bread is still warm. The last customers are eating quietly. A few dates remain in a basket. A small bowl of nuts sits beside them. The scene is peaceful. Nothing dramatic has happened. And yet, perhaps that is precisely why it feels so timeless. Thousands of years ago, a traveler could sit beneath an awning after a long day and enjoy a simple meal. Today, someone can finish a long journey, sit beneath a tree, and enjoy a snack in almost exactly the same spirit. The ingredients may differ. The world may look completely different. But the feeling is familiar. You are tired. You are hungry. You find somewhere comfortable. You eat something simple. And for a few moments, everything feels right. The traveler walks toward his resting place. The street is quiet now. The stars have become brighter. The lamps glow softly in the darkness. Behind him, the food seller begins closing the stall. Bread is covered. Dates are stored. Nuts are gathered. The fire is reduced. The night continues. And somewhere in the settlement, another traveler is probably doing the same thing. Preparing food for tomorrow. Saving a few dates. Wrapping bread. Checking water. Getting ready for another road. Ancient journeys were built from such small preparations. A bundle. A pouch. A loaf. A handful of dried fruit. A few nuts. And the quiet confidence that there would be enough to reach the next stopping place. The sounds and smells of the bazaar. Morning returned softly to the ancient Persian settlement. The darkness lifted from the rooftops, and the first light touched the distant hills. A pale golden glow slowly spread across the walls, courtyards, and narrow streets. The traveler woke beneath a simple covering. For a few moments, he remained still. He could hear the settlement beginning to stir. A door opened. An animal moved nearby. Someone spoke quietly. Then came the familiar sound of an oven being prepared. The day was beginning again. The traveler stepped outside. The air was cool, and the streets were still relatively empty. But he knew that would not last long. The bazaar would soon awaken. In an ancient Persian settlement, the marketplace was more than a place where people exchanged goods. It was a place where people met. Where news traveled. Where travelers found directions. Where merchants displayed their products. Where craftspeople worked. And, of course, where food could be found. The traveler followed the sound of footsteps toward the market. As he walked, the smells became stronger. Fresh bread. Roasted nuts. Dates. Dried fruit. Smoke from charcoal. Herbs. The scent of warm grain. And somewhere deeper in the bazaar, something sweet. He slowed down. There was no reason to hurry. The morning was pleasant. He had already spent many days on the road, and he had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. The bazaar was beginning to wake. One stall at a time. A merchant lifted a wooden shutter. Another swept dust from the front of his shop. A woman arranged baskets of fruit. A baker carried freshly prepared bread from an oven. The first customers appeared. A farmer came in from the surrounding countryside. A craftsman walked toward his workshop. A traveler searched for provisions. And among them were people looking for something small to eat. The traveler stopped beside a bread seller. A fresh loaf was placed on the counter. Steam escaped as it was broken. The smell was wonderful. The traveler bought one. He did not need much. Just enough for the morning. He tore off a piece while continuing to walk. The bread was still warm. It was simple. But it was exactly what he wanted. As he walked deeper into the market, the sounds became more varied. A merchant called out to a customer. A donkey complained loudly. Someone laughed. A child asked for something. A seller negotiated over a price. Metal struck metal in a nearby workshop. And beneath all these sounds was the constant murmur of people. The bazaar was alive. Yet the food sellers had their own little world within it. One stall held dates. Another displayed nuts. A third had dried fruits. A fourth offered cheese and other dairy products. There were ingredients for people buying food to take home. And there were foods that could be eaten immediately. This distinction mattered. A person buying grain was planning for later. A person buying a date might be hungry right now. A traveler buying bread needed something for the road. A worker buying a small snack needed something before returning to work. The market served all of them. This was one of the great advantages of a busy marketplace. You did not have to prepare everything yourself. If you had the means, you could purchase something someone else had already prepared. That did not mean ancient Persia had modern fast food. The scale was entirely different. But the basic idea of buying ready-to-eat food was not strange. People have always looked for convenient ways to eat. And when enough people gather in one place, food sellers naturally appear. The traveler continued walking. He reached a stall where several baskets were arranged beneath a woven covering. The seller had dates, dried figs, perhaps raisins, other dried fruits. The colors were beautiful in the morning light. Golden, brown, deep purple, dark red. The seller picked up a few pieces and showed them to a customer. The customer examined them, then bought some. The transaction was quick. The seller wrapped the fruit. The customer placed it inside a cloth pouch. And then they moved on. The traveler watched. He had already learned how useful dried fruit could be. On the road, it was light. It did not require cooking. And it could provide sweetness when needed. He decided to buy some for later. Perhaps he would eat them during the next stage of his journey. The seller measured out a small amount. The traveler paid. Then he continued. Now he noticed another smell. Roasted nuts. A seller was heating them carefully over a small fire. The smell drifted across the street. Warm. Nutty. Slightly smoky. People were beginning to gather. Roasted foods had a special appeal. The heat changed the texture and flavor. Something plain could become fragrant and satisfying simply by being roasted. The traveler stopped. He bought a small portion. The seller placed it into a simple container. The traveler took one. It was warm. He smiled. This was exactly the kind of small pleasure that could make a morning better. No feast. No elaborate meal. Just something tasty. He continued walking, eating slowly. The bazaar became busier. More people arrived. Merchants spoke louder. Animals moved through the narrow streets. The sunlight became stronger. The shade beneath the awnings became valuable. People began standing beneath them. A group of workers paused beside one stall. One bought bread. Another bought dates. Someone else shared roasted nuts. They talked while eating. Perhaps they were discussing their work. Perhaps they were talking about a customer. Perhaps they were simply enjoying the morning. The traveler watched them for a moment. Their behavior felt familiar. People today also gather around food. They meet at stalls. They share snacks. They eat while talking. They buy something small when they are hungry. The surroundings may change, The food may change, but the social nature of eating remains. Food brings people together. The bazaar becomes even warmer. The traveler finds a shaded corner. He sits for a moment. His bread is nearly gone. A few roasted nuts remain. He takes them slowly. A merchant nearby is speaking with another traveler. They are comparing routes. One has come from the east. Another is traveling west. The conversation is practical. Roads, water, markets, prices, places to rest. The bazaar is full of information. A traveler can learn things here simply by listening. Where is the next settlement? Which road is safer? Where can animals drink? Where is food cheaper? Which market is busiest? The food stalls are part of this network. People gather around them. And as they eat, they talk. News travels naturally. A market therefore feeds more than the body. It also feeds curiosity. The traveler eventually stands again. He walks toward the center of the bazaar. Here, the smells are even stronger. A bakery. A fruit seller. A spice merchant. A nut seller. Someone preparing a hot dish. Someone selling honey. The air is filled with layers of scent. One moment he smells bread. Then smoke. Then fruit. Then something sweet. The aromas overlap. For a modern visitor, the experience might be overwhelming. But for the people living here, these smells would have been part of everyday life. Children would recognize them. Workers would know which stall sold the freshest bread. Travelers would remember which market had the sweetest dates. Families would have favorite sellers. Food created familiarity. A person might walk through the bazaar and know exactly where to go. Perhaps the baker near the entrance. The fruit seller beside the well. The nut seller under the blue cloth awning. The cheese seller near the eastern wall. Every market had its own character. And every seller had a reputation. Good food brought customers back. Fair prices brought trust. Reliable quality mattered. The traveler watches one seller carefully weighing dates. Another customer arrives. They speak for a while. The seller recognizes him. Perhaps he is a regular. The transaction feels friendly. This was commerce, but it was also personal. Markets were built around repeated human contact. People saw one another again and again. They developed relationships. Food was part of that. The traveler walks farther. The sun is now high enough to make the open parts of the street uncomfortable. He stays beneath the awnings. The bazaar has become crowded. People move slowly. Children stay close to their families. Animals are guided carefully. Merchants continue calling to customers. But beneath the noise, there remains the steady rhythm of eating. Someone bites into bread. Someone opens a pouch of dates. Someone shares nuts. Someone drinks water. Someone purchases a sweet treat. The day continues. The traveler realizes that he could probably spend hours here. There is always another stall. Another smell. Another conversation. Another small food. But eventually he must continue his journey. Before leaving, he purchases a little more food. Bread. Dates. Dried fruit. Perhaps some nuts. His travel pouch is full again. He has no idea exactly when he will need them. But that is the point. Food carried in advance provides comfort. It means hunger will not control the journey. He leaves the bazaar slowly. Behind him, the market continues. The sounds become softer. The smells begin to fade. The road ahead opens into the sunlight. He looks back once. The bazaar is still busy. The bread ovens are burning. The dates are being sold. The nuts are being roasted. The merchants are talking. The people are eating. And for a moment, he thinks about how strange it is that such ordinary foods can make a place feel alive. The evening food stalls. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon. After the brightness and heat of the afternoon, the ancient Persian bazaar was changing once again. The streets were still busy, but the feeling was different now. The harshest sunlight no longer reached directly into the narrow lanes. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the woven coverings above the stalls caught the last warm light of the day. People were beginning to slow down. Workers were finishing their tasks. Merchants were counting their goods. Travelers were searching for places to rest. Families were beginning to think about the evening meal. And as the day moved toward night, another kind of food market began to appear. The evening food stalls. A small fire was lit beneath an awning. Then another. Then another. Soon, little points of orange light were glowing throughout the marketplace. The smell of charcoal drifted through the air. Bread was being warmed. Nuts were being roasted. Fruit was being arranged. Honey and sweet foods appeared beneath the lamps. The evening market had its own atmosphere. It was softer than the daytime bazaar. The voices were lower. The air was cooler. The lamps created small circles of golden light. And people seemed more willing to pause. During the day, the market was often about work. Buy this. Sell that. Carry these goods. Finish that task. But evening was different. People had more time. They could sit. They could talk. They could eat slowly. And sometimes, they could enjoy a small treat simply because the day was nearly over. Imagine walking through one of these streets. The sky above is turning deep blue. The first stars are beginning to appear. The market is illuminated by small lamps. A seller sits beside a basket of dates. Another has dried fruits. A third has roasted nuts. Nearby, a baker is preparing fresh bread. The smell moves through the cool air. You hear the crackle of a fire. Someone laughs. A child speaks excitedly. A traveler asks about the road ahead. An old merchant finishes a conversation. Everything feels calm. The food is simple. But the atmosphere makes it special. A piece of warm bread eaten beneath an evening lamp can feel very different from the same bread eaten quickly in the middle of a busy morning. Time changes the experience. The evening invites people to linger. A worker finishes his day and approaches a food stall. He has been working since early morning. His shoulders are tired. His hands are dusty. He does not want a complicated meal. He wants something warm. Something filling. Something that tastes good. The seller offers bread. The worker takes it. Perhaps there is cheese. Perhaps some dates. Perhaps a few roasted nuts. He sits beneath the awning. The food is placed in front of him. For the first time all day, he does not have to hurry. He takes a bite. Then another. The market continues around him. But he is resting. This is the quiet pleasure of evening food. It is not only nourishment. It is a reward for having reached the end of the day. And people have always understood that feeling. After hours of work, Food tastes better. After walking a long road, water feels cooler. After standing beneath the sun, shade feels softer. The ancient world knew these simple pleasures as well as we do. Nearby, a group of travelers has gathered around a small fire. They have not yet decided where they will sleep. Their animals are resting. One traveler opens a cloth bundle. Inside are dates and dried fruit. Another has bread. A third has nuts. They begin sharing. Someone purchases fresh bread from a nearby seller. The bread is still warm. It is passed around. The travelers eat together. Their conversation becomes easier. They talk about the day's journey. One person tells a story about getting lost on the road. Another laughs. Someone complains about the heat. Someone else says tomorrow's journey will be shorter. The food continues to disappear. There is something comforting about eating after a long day of travel. The road is behind them. The night is ahead. For now, they are safe. They have food. They have water. They have one another. The lamps glow softly. The fire burns. The stars become brighter. And the ancient Persian evening feels almost timeless. The food sellers continue working. One prepares another batch of bread. Another measures dried fruit. A nut seller gently moves his roasting foods over the heat. The smell changes as the foods warm. The nuts become fragrant. The bread becomes crisp around the edges. The dates remain sweet. Honey catches the light. A person walking past might not even be hungry. But the smells make them stop. That is another ancient truth about food. Sometimes you eat because you need to. Sometimes you eat because something smells wonderful. The distinction has probably existed for as long as markets have existed. A person can walk past a bakery perfectly satisfied. Then the smell of fresh bread reaches them. Suddenly, they want some. The ancient Persian marketplace would have understood this perfectly. Food sellers did not need modern advertising. The smell itself could attract customers. Smoke rising from a cooking fire. Fresh bread emerging from an oven. Roasted nuts releasing their aroma. Honey and fruit creating a sweet scent. The market advertised itself. The evening becomes darker. More lamps are lit. The daytime stalls begin closing. Some merchants pack their goods. Others remain open. Food sellers often have good reason to stay longer. People still need to eat. Travelers still arrive. Workers still return home. An evening hunger is predictable. A family may have eaten earlier. But someone walking through the market might still want something small. Perhaps a few dates. Perhaps nuts. Perhaps a piece of bread. Perhaps something sweet. The idea of eating between meals does not belong only to modern life. It is a natural part of human behavior. We become hungry. We see food. We eat. And sometimes, we eat because the food looks appealing. Ancient people were not immune to temptation. A child might notice a bowl of dried fruit. A worker might smell roasted nuts. A traveler might see fresh bread. A merchant might decide to buy a small treat for the family at home. These purchases could be tiny, but tiny purchases could still bring happiness. Imagine a father returning home after work. He has spent the day in the market. Before leaving, he buys a few dates. Perhaps his children like them. He carries the small bundle home. When he enters the courtyard, the children come toward him. He gives them the dates. They smile. It is not an expensive gift. It does not need to be. The sweetness is enough. The evening continues. The family sits together. The dates are shared. Someone breaks bread. Someone brings water. The day slowly disappears. These little moments would never appear in royal inscriptions. No historian would record them individually. But they were probably repeated countless times. This is why ordinary food matters when we think about history. It helps us imagine real people. Not just kings and soldiers, but parents, children, workers, travelers, merchants, bakers, farmers, food sellers, people who lived ordinary lives, people who became hungry, people who enjoyed small treats, people who sat beneath awnings in the evening and watched the marketplace slowly become quiet. The traveler we have been following is still somewhere in the settlement. Perhaps he has finished his evening meal. Perhaps he is preparing for sleep. His food pouch is now filled again. Tomorrow he will continue. The road will take him somewhere else. But tonight, he can listen to the sounds of the market. The fire crackles. The lamps flicker. Someone closes a wooden shutter. A donkey moves slowly through the street. A final customer buys bread. The seller wraps it. Coins change hands. Then the customer disappears into the darkness. One by one, the stalls begin to close. The market becomes quieter. The fires are reduced. The baskets are covered. The remaining dates are stored. The dried fruits are protected. The nuts are gathered. The bread is wrapped. The lamps continue burning for a little while longer. The evening food market has almost finished. But the smell remains. Smoke hangs gently in the cool air. The scent of bread lingers. A little sweetness from dates and honey remains around the stalls. The streets are now mostly empty. The day's noise has faded. The bazaar has become peaceful. And perhaps somewhere, someone is still sitting outside a small shop, enjoying the last piece of bread from the evening. There is no hurry. The night is young. The stars are bright. The city is safe and quiet. The ancient Persian evening has reached its calmest moment. It is easy, from our modern perspective, to think of food mainly in terms of meals. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. But life is rarely so organized. People eat when they are hungry. They eat when food is available. They eat when someone offers them something. They eat when something smells wonderful. They eat to celebrate. They eat to rest. They eat while traveling. They eat while working. And sometimes they eat simply because the day has been long and they want a little pleasure before sleep. The evening stalls offered exactly that. A small piece of comfort. Something warm. Something sweet. Something familiar. And perhaps this is why markets have always been such fascinating places. They do not simply sell food. They sell moments. A traveler remembers the bread he bought before leaving. A child remembers the sweetness of dates. A worker remembers the warm food he ate after a difficult day. Warm bread, roasted grains, and the comfort of simple food. Morning came quietly to the ancient Persian settlement. The night had left the streets cool, and for a short while, the city seemed almost motionless. Then, somewhere beyond the walls, a fire was kindled. A little smoke rose into the pale morning sky. Soon came another sound. The gentle crackle of burning wood. Then the smell. Warm grain. Fresh bread. A faint sweetness carried by the breeze. It was the smell of breakfast. And in an ancient city, the smell of bread could be one of the most comforting sounds imaginable. The traveler we have been following had slept well. He woke slowly, listening to the settlement begin another day. Outside his resting place, animals were being prepared for work. Doors opened. Water was being carried. Someone swept the entrance to a home. A merchant called quietly to another merchant. The city was waking. But the food sellers had been awake even earlier. Bread required preparation. Fire had to be started. Dough had to be shaped. Ovens had to be heated. And when the first loaves were ready, their smell began traveling through the streets. The traveler stepped outside. He had learned that a journey was easier when it began with food. His pouch still contained some dried fruit and nuts from the previous day. But this morning, he wanted something warm. He followed the smell of bread. Soon he found a small bakery. It was not a grand establishment. There was no elaborate sign. Just an oven, a working area, baskets, and people moving steadily through the morning. The baker was already busy. A piece of dough was being shaped. Another was placed near the heat. Someone carried a finished loaf away. The traveler stood nearby. He watched. There was something peaceful about watching bread being made. The process was simple. Mix. Knead. Shape. Heat. Bake. But behind that simplicity was knowledge passed down through generations. People knew how much grain was needed. They knew how the dough should feel. They knew how hot the oven should become. They knew when the bread was ready. These skills were part of everyday life. The traveler purchased a loaf. The baker handed it to him. It was warm. The traveler broke off a piece. Steam escaped. He tasted it. The bread was simple. Yet after waking hungry, it was exactly what he wanted. He sat beneath a nearby awning. The morning sun was beginning to reach the street. He ate slowly. There was something comforting about warm bread that did not require anything else. No elaborate sauce. No complicated preparation. Just grain transformed into food. For ancient people, bread was far more than a side dish. It could be central to a meal. It could accompany other foods. It could be carried on journeys. And it could be eaten whenever hunger appeared. A person could take bread to the fields. A traveler could take bread onto the road. A worker could eat it during a short break. A family could share it around the evening fire. Bread was everywhere. And because grain could be stored for long periods, it was one of the most dependable foods available. But the traveler noticed something else in the market. A seller was preparing roasted grains. The grains were being heated carefully. The smell was warm and slightly nutty. People stopped to watch. Some bought small portions. Roasted grains were another example of how simple ingredients could become convenient snacks. Grain did not always need to become bread. It could be roasted. It could be ground. It could be cooked into other foods. It could be combined with ingredients such as fruit, nuts, or sweeteners. Different preparations created different textures and flavors. This variety mattered. Imagine eating bread every day. Even if you enjoyed it, eventually you might want something different. A roasted grain snack could provide that change. A handful could be carried. It was dry. It was easy to store. And it could be eaten without much preparation. The traveler bought a small amount. He placed it in his pouch. He knew it would be useful later. The market was becoming busier now. Farmers were arriving. Workers were beginning their tasks. Merchants were arranging goods. Children moved through the streets. And food sellers continued preparing simple things for hungry customers. A woman stopped at the grain cellar. She purchased some roasted grain. Perhaps she was taking it home. Perhaps it was for her children. Perhaps she planned to combine it with other ingredients. The transaction was quick. The seller measured the grain. The woman paid. Then she disappeared into the crowd. Another customer came. Then another. The stall remained busy. This was how everyday food moved through an ancient community. Not in enormous quantities at once, but through hundreds of small exchanges. A little grain here. A little bread there. A few dates. Some nuts. A piece of cheese. A little dried fruit. Each purchase was small. Together, they fed the city. The traveler continued through the market. He noticed a group of workers sitting in the shade. They had brought their own food. Bread. Perhaps cheese. Some dates. They were eating quickly because they had work waiting. But even their short meal contained variety. Bread provided something filling. Dates brought sweetness. Cheese added another flavor. Water cooled the throat. The meal did not need to be complicated. It simply needed to satisfy. The traveler passed them and continued. He found another stall selling something made from grains and sweet ingredients. The exact preparation may have varied from place to place. Ancient cooks were skilled at combining what they had. Honey could sweeten foods. Fruit could add sweetness. Nuts could add texture. Grain could provide a base. With these simple ingredients, a person could create something that felt much more special than plain grain. This was the beginning of what we might think of as a treat. Not a packaged snack. Not something produced in a factory. But something prepared with a little extra care. A sweetened grain mixture. A honeyed piece of bread. Dried fruit combined with nuts. A warm pastry-like preparation. The exact foods depended on region, season, and household tradition. But the principle was universal. Take ordinary ingredients. Combine them thoughtfully. Create something enjoyable. The traveler stopped to watch one seller preparing a sweet food. Honey was being used carefully. The seller did not pour it everywhere. It was precious. A little was enough. The sweetness spread through the mixture. A customer purchased a small portion. The traveler considered buying some too. He smiled. Perhaps tomorrow. For now, he had enough food. He continued walking. The morning had become brighter. The coolness was disappearing. The traveler knew the road would soon become hot. He needed to continue before the strongest part of the day. Before leaving, he purchased another piece of bread. He wrapped it carefully. He also kept his roasted grains and dried fruit. His small food supply was becoming a familiar companion. He had begun to understand how people on the road might have thought about food. You did not simply ask, "What do I want to eat?" You also asked, "What will survive? What will be easy to carry? What can be eaten without cooking? What can keep me going? What can I share? What can I save for later?" These questions shaped the ancient diet. Food had to be useful. Taste mattered. But practicality mattered too. The traveler left the settlement. The road stretched ahead. The morning sun illuminated the fields. He walked steadily. After some time, he became hungry again. He stopped beneath a tree. He opened his bundle. The bread was still soft enough to eat. He took some roasted grain. Then a little dried fruit. He ate slowly. The meal was quiet. There was no market around him now. No merchants. No crowds. Only the road, the trees, the distant fields, and the sounds of morning. He looked across the landscape. The Persian world was enormous. Different regions would have offered different foods. In fertile areas, there were grains and fruits. In warmer regions, dates. In uplands, nuts and other crops. Along trade routes, foods could travel from one region to another. The people who lived within this vast world had to adapt to what their surroundings offered. And they became remarkably skilled at doing so. The traveler finished his food. He brushed a few crumbs from his clothing. Then he continued. The sun rose higher. The road became warmer. But he felt satisfied. He had bread. He had dried fruit. He had roasted grains. He had water. For now, that was enough. As he walked, he thought about the bakery. The smell of warm bread. The sound of the oven. The baker's hands shaping dough. The small market filled with people. It was strange how a simple loaf could make a place feel like home. Perhaps the traveler had eaten bread in many cities. Yet every bakery had its own character. Different shapes. Different textures. Different ways of baking. Some bread may have been thin. Some thicker. Some softer. Some crisp around the edges. The details changed. But the purpose remained. To nourish. To satisfy. To share. Bread was perhaps the most humble food in the market. And yet it could be deeply comforting. Imagine a family returning home after a long day. Someone brings fresh bread. It is placed in the center. The family gathers. The loaf is broken. Pieces are passed around. Other foods accompany it. Maybe cheese. Maybe herbs. Maybe fruit. Maybe dates. Maybe a warm dish. The bread connects everything. It becomes the center of the meal. And because it is shared, it becomes part of family life. A little sweetness after the long day. By late afternoon, the ancient Persian countryside had begun to soften beneath the lowering sun. The strongest heat of the day was slowly disappearing, and the long shadows of trees stretched across the road. The traveler continued at an easy pace, no longer hurrying toward his destination. His food pouch was lighter now. The fresh bread he had bought that morning had been eaten little by little. Some roasted grain remained, along with a handful of dried fruit and a few nuts. There was still enough. And knowing that made the journey feel easier. He had learned that a small supply of food could bring a surprising amount of comfort. When the road was long, hunger could become distracting. But when a traveler knew that a little bread or dried fruit was waiting inside his pouch, the distance seemed less important. He walked beneath the warm evening light. Ahead, he could see another small settlement. A few buildings stood close together, and thin trails of smoke rose into the sky. Perhaps someone was preparing an evening meal. Perhaps bread was being baked. Perhaps a small fire had been lit for cooking. The traveler smiled. He was beginning to feel hungry again. As he approached the settlement, the first smells reached him. Roasted grain. Warm bread. Something sweet. The smell of honey lingered in the air. He followed it toward a small courtyard where several people had gathered around a food cellar. The stall was simple. A low table. A few clay vessels. baskets of grain, dates, nuts, dried fruit, and a small vessel containing honey. The seller was preparing a simple sweet mixture. Nothing elaborate. Grain had been roasted and combined with a little sweetness. The traveler watched with interest. Ancient cooks understood something that remains true today. A little sweetness can transform a plain ingredient. Grain by itself can be humble. But add honey, dates, or dried fruit, and suddenly it becomes something people look forward to eating. The seller placed a small portion into a bowl. A customer tasted it. He nodded. Then he paid and walked away. Another customer arrived. The traveler waited patiently. When his turn came, he purchased a small portion. He sat beneath a nearby awning. The food was warm. The sweetness was gentle rather than overwhelming. The roasted grain gave it a pleasant texture. He ate slowly. After a day of walking, the little treat felt surprisingly satisfying. There was something peaceful about eating it while watching the settlement move toward evening. People were returning home. Animals were being brought inside. Children were playing near the courtyards. Merchants were beginning to close their stalls. A woman carried a basket toward her home. An older man sat outside his doorway. The sky was turning golden. The traveler finished his food. He did not need anything more. The small sweet had done exactly what he wanted. It had given him a moment of pleasure. This was perhaps one of the most important differences between nourishment and a treat. Nourishment answers hunger. A treat answers something slightly different. It gives pleasure. And people have always understood that distinction. A person can eat a filling meal and still enjoy something sweet afterward. Not because they need it, but because it makes the meal feel complete. In ancient Persia, sweetness could come from natural ingredients. Dates were naturally rich and sweet. Dried fruits became concentrated. Honey provided another source. These could be combined with grain, bread, nuts, and other foods. There was no need for modern refined sugar. Nature already provided enough sweetness for a special moment. The traveler remembered the dates he had eaten earlier during his journey. They had been small, simple, but they had helped him through long stretches of road. Now the sweet grain mixture felt different. It was warm. It had been prepared only a short while earlier. And someone had taken the time to make it. That made it special. Nearby, a family sat together. They had brought their evening food outside. Bread was placed between them. A bowl of dates sat nearby. There were perhaps nuts and fruit as well. The children reached for the dates. The adults talked quietly. No one seemed to be in a hurry. The traveler watched them for a moment. It reminded him that food was not only about traveling. It was also about belonging. A family could share the same bowl. Friends could divide a handful of nuts. Neighbors could exchange food. A merchant could offer a customer a taste. A traveler could share his last few dates with someone beside him. Food created small connections. The sun continued to fall. The marketplace became quieter. The traveler stood and walked toward the edge of the settlement. Before leaving, he bought a little dried fruit. He wanted something for the following morning. The seller wrapped it carefully. The traveler placed it inside his pouch. He checked the remaining bread. There was still enough for breakfast. He had learned to plan ahead. That simple habit had made his journey much easier. He continued walking until he reached a quiet place outside the settlement. There was a low wall beside the road. He sat there and watched the sunset. The sky changed slowly. Gold became orange. Orange became pink. Then the colors faded toward blue. The air became cooler. For a moment, the traveler forgot about the road. He simply watched the evening arrive. He took one last piece of dried fruit from his pouch. He ate it slowly. There was something deeply peaceful about such a small meal at the end of a long day. No crowded dining hall. No elaborate table. No music. Only the quiet road, the fading sunlight, and a little sweetness. Perhaps this is what ancient snacks were often about. Not extravagance. Not excess. But convenience, preservation, and pleasure. A person could carry a few dates, a handful of nuts, some dried fruit, a little bread, and those simple foods could accompany them through an entire day. They could be eaten while walking, while working, while resting, while talking, or while watching the sunset. The traveler finished his dried fruit. He closed the pouch. The road ahead would wait until morning. Tonight, he would rest. The settlement behind him was becoming quiet. A few lamps had appeared in the distance. Their small lights flickered against the growing darkness. Somewhere, bread was being prepared for tomorrow. Somewhere else, a family was finishing its evening meal. A seller was probably covering his baskets of dates. Another was storing nuts and dried fruit. The day was ending. And tomorrow, the cycle would begin again. Grain would be prepared. Bread would be baked. Honey would be measured. Dates would be sold. Nuts would be roasted. Travelers would arrive hungry. Workers would stop for small meals. Children would ask for sweet things. And ordinary people would continue finding little moments of pleasure in simple food. The traveler leaned back against the wall. The evening breeze moved gently across the road. He listened to the distant sounds of the settlement. A quiet voice. An animal moving. A door closing. Then silence. He felt tired now. But it was a comfortable tiredness. The kind that comes after a day spent walking beneath an open sky. He had eaten. He had water. He had a safe place to rest. For tonight, nothing else was necessary. He closed his eyes. The memory of warm bread returned. Then the taste of roasted grain. Then the sweetness of honey and dried fruit. Simple flavors. Quiet pleasures. And as darkness settled completely over the ancient Persian landscape, the traveler slowly drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring another road. Another market. Another meal. And perhaps another small treat waiting beneath the shade of an ancient Persian awning. The little treats of the Persian road. The morning arrived slowly over the Persian countryside. Before the sun appeared above the distant hills, the sky was already beginning to brighten. A cool breeze moved across the fields, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and smoke from distant cooking fires. The traveler opened his eyes. For a few moments, he remained beneath his covering, listening to the quiet sounds around him. A bird called from somewhere nearby. An animal shifted its weight. A person walked along the road. Then came the familiar sound of bread being prepared. The traveler smiled. Another day had begun. He sat up and reached for his food pouch. Inside were the supplies he had collected during the previous days. A little bread. Some dried fruit. A few nuts. And roasted grain. He examined everything carefully. There was enough for the morning. He took a small piece of bread and ate it slowly. The bread was no longer warm, but it was still satisfying. Then he ate a few pieces of dried fruit. The sweetness seemed brighter in the cool morning air. He drank some water. For a few minutes, he simply sat. There was no reason to rush. The road would still be there. The sun would rise. And eventually, he would continue. But before leaving, he decided to visit the small market nearby. Perhaps he could find something interesting to carry for the journey. The market was already beginning to wake. A baker was arranging fresh loaves. A fruit seller was preparing baskets. A merchant was opening his stall. A woman carried a clay vessel through the street. The smells were gentle at first. Fresh bread. Warm grain. Smoke. Then, as the traveler walked farther into the market, he noticed something sweeter. Honey. He followed the scent. A small seller sat beneath a woven canopy. Several clay containers were arranged in front of him. One contained honey. Another held dried fruit. There were also nuts and small prepared foods. The traveler stopped. The seller greeted him. The traveler looked carefully at the foods. He was not searching for a full meal. He wanted something small. Something that could survive the road. Something pleasant to eat when the afternoon became long. This was an ancient version of the same problem travelers still face today. What should I take with me? The seller showed him several choices. Dates. Dried fruit. Nuts. Perhaps a small sweet preparation made with honey. The traveler considered them. Dates were reliable. Dried fruit was easy to carry. Nuts were filling. And something sweet could make a difficult journey feel more pleasant. He bought a little of each. The seller wrapped the food in a simple cloth. The traveler placed everything into his pouch. The pouch was becoming a small collection of the ancient world's convenient foods. Nothing had been manufactured in a distant factory. Nothing came in brightly colored packaging. Everything came from the landscape. Trees. Fields. Bees. Farmers. Bakers. And the hands of people who prepared food every day. The traveler thanked the seller. Then he left the market. The morning was already becoming warmer. He walked along the road, listening to the steady rhythm of his footsteps. Step. 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 The countryside passed slowly. Fields gave way to dry land. Trees became less frequent. The distant mountains seemed to move farther away. After some time, he stopped beneath a tree. He opened his pouch. He took a few nuts. They were crunchy and satisfying. Then he ate a piece of dried fruit. The contrast was pleasant. The nuts were rich and earthy. The fruit was sweet. He followed them with a small piece of bread. A very simple meal. But it gave him what he needed. Energy. Comfort. And a little pleasure. The traveler continued. As the sun climbed higher, he encountered another group traveling along the road. They were merchants. Their animals carried bundles of goods. The group stopped beneath a cluster of trees. The traveler greeted them. They invited him to rest nearby. Soon, food appeared. One merchant had bread. Another had dates. A third carried nuts. Someone had dried fruit. The traveler realized that they had brought almost exactly the same kinds of food he had purchased. It was not surprising. These were the foods that made sense on a journey. They could be packed. They could be stored. They could be shared. And they could be eaten without much preparation. The merchants began eating. The traveler joined them. A few dates were passed around. Someone broke the bread. The nuts were placed in the center. The dried fruit was shared. The meal was simple, but the conversation made it enjoyable. One merchant spoke about the road ahead. Another mentioned a market they had visited recently. Someone complained about the heat. Everyone laughed. For a little while, the journey became easier. The traveler noticed something. People did not need much to make a meal feel complete. Bread, fruit, nuts, water, and company. That could be enough. In a world without restaurants on every corner, without packaged snacks waiting in shops, people learned to make ordinary ingredients satisfying. They also learned to appreciate them. A handful of nuts could be a snack. A date could be a dessert. Dried fruit could be saved for later. Bread could become a meal when nothing else was available. And honey could turn something ordinary into something special. The travelers eventually stood again. They packed their belongings. The road continued. The traveler walked alongside them for a while. The sun was strong now. The road shimmered in the heat. Everyone spoke less. Walking required concentration. Eventually, they stopped again. This time, the traveler reached into his pouch. He brought out the small honeyed treat he had purchased that morning. He had been saving it. One of the merchants noticed. "What is that?" The traveler smiled. He explained where he had bought it. The merchant asked for a taste. The traveler shared a little. Soon, the small treat was divided between them. It was gone quickly. But the moment mattered more than the amount. Sharing food on the road could turn strangers into companions. The traveler thought about this as they continued. Perhaps this was why food sellers were so important. They were not merely selling calories. They were providing something people could carry into their lives. A piece of bread. A handful of dates. A sweet bite. A pouch of nuts. These things traveled farther than the marketplace itself. A merchant could buy food in one city and eat it many miles away. A traveler could carry dried fruit from one settlement to another. A family could purchase dates and save them for several days. Food moved with people. It connected distant places. And some foods were especially good at traveling. Dried fruits were among them. Nuts were another. Dates could survive long journeys. Bread could be carried for a time. These foods became part of the rhythm of roads and caravans. The traveler eventually parted from the merchants. They were heading toward another destination. He was traveling elsewhere. They exchanged farewells. Then the traveler continued alone. The afternoon slowly faded. He stopped beside a small stream. The water was cool. He drank. Then he sat beneath a tree. His food pouch was lighter again. He took a few roasted grains. They were dry and slightly nutty. He ate them slowly while watching the water move. The moment was peaceful. There was no market. No crowd. No conversation. Only water. Wind. Trees. And the quiet sound of the countryside. The traveler thought about how much food could be carried in such a small pouch. Not enough for a feast, but enough to make a journey possible. That was the important thing. Ancient travelers did not need elaborate meals every few hours. They needed reliable food. Food that could survive. Food that could be eaten simply. Food that could provide energy. And occasionally, food that could bring a little happiness. The traveler looked at the remaining dates. He decided to save them for the evening. The thought pleased him. There is something comforting about knowing a small treat is waiting later. Even today, people understand that feeling. A person may save a favorite piece of food until the end. They may keep something sweet for later. They may carry a snack specifically because they know the journey will become tiring. The habit is ancient. The traveler stood. The sun was beginning to lower. The stream reflected the evening light. He gathered his things and returned to the road. The settlement he hoped to reach was still several miles away. But he was not worried. His supplies were enough. His feet were tired, but the air was becoming cooler. And somewhere inside his pouch were the dates he had saved. He continued walking. The road became quieter. The sky slowly changed color. Gold appeared along the horizon. Then orange. Then a soft rose. The traveler walked beneath the fading light. He thought about the morning market, the honey cellar, the dried fruit, the roasted grains, the merchants beneath the trees, the shared food. None of these moments had been extraordinary. And yet, together, they formed the experience of the journey. Perhaps ancient life was made from thousands of such small moments. A warm loaf, a sweet date, a handful of nuts, a little honey, a conversation beneath a tree, a pause beside water, a quiet road at sunset. The traveler reached the edge of the next settlement. Lights were beginning to appear. He could smell food again. Somewhere nearby, bread was being baked. He smiled. He had reached the end of another day. And this time, he still had his dates. He touched the small pouch at his side. The sweet bites saved for evening. The traveler entered the settlement just as evening began to settle over the rooftops. The last sunlight rested gently on the walls, while the narrow street slowly filled with the softer sounds of night. Lamps were being lit beneath wooden awnings, small fires glowed outside food stalls, and families were beginning to return home after the day's work. The traveler felt tired. But it was the pleasant kind of tiredness that comes after a long journey. His feet were dusty. His shoulders were weary. His clothes carried the smell of the road. Yet inside his small food pouch was something he had deliberately saved. A few dates. He had thought about them several times during the afternoon. He could have eaten them beneath the tree. He could have shared them beside the stream. But he had decided to wait. Now, as the evening became cooler, he finally reached for them. He sat beneath a quiet awning beside a small food stall. The seller had already begun preparing for the evening. A little fire burned nearby. Bread was stacked in a basket. Nuts were arranged in small portions. Dried fruits rested inside shallow vessels. The traveler opened his pouch. He took one date. For a moment, he simply looked at it. It was small and dark, with a soft surface that reflected the warm light of the nearby lamp. Then he ate it. The sweetness seemed especially rich after the long day. He chewed slowly. There was no need to hurry. The journey was over for tonight. The road could wait until morning. He took another date. Then he stopped. 2 were enough. The remaining ones could wait. Perhaps he would eat them tomorrow. Perhaps he would share them. There was something satisfying about saving food. When food was limited and journeys were uncertain, people had to think about tomorrow. A traveler who ate everything at once might discover later that he had nothing left. So small portions had meaning. One date now. Another later. A piece of bread in the morning. A handful of nuts during the afternoon. Dried fruit when hunger returned. Food became part of the rhythm of the journey. The traveler looked around the evening market. A family was purchasing bread. A merchant was buying dried fruit. Two workers were sharing roasted nuts. A child stood beside a parent, watching a seller arrange dates. The child pointed toward them. The parent smiled and purchased a small handful. The seller wrapped them. The child received one immediately. The expression on the child's face changed. The sweetness had arrived. It was a tiny moment, but the traveler noticed it. Perhaps people thousands of years ago experienced the same small excitement children experience today when receiving a favorite snack. The world around them may have been completely different. But children were still children. Sweet foods were still exciting. And adults still enjoyed watching children enjoy them. The traveler smiled. Then he turned toward the food stall. The seller was preparing a simple mixture of dried fruit and nuts. The traveler watched carefully. The ingredients were ordinary. But together they made something appealing. Dried fruit brought sweetness. Nuts brought richness and texture. The combination could be carried easily and eaten without cooking. For a traveler, it was almost perfect. He purchased a small portion. The seller wrapped it in cloth. The traveler placed it inside his pouch. His supplies were growing again. This was another part of ancient travel that was easy to overlook. A journey was not simply a line from one city to another. It was a series of small preparations. Before leaving, you needed water. You needed clothing. You needed supplies. You needed food. When you arrived somewhere, you replenished those supplies. Then you continued. Markets made this possible. A traveler did not have to carry enough food for an entire journey if settlements and markets appeared along the route. He could purchase what he needed as he went. Dates in one place. Bread in another. Nuts somewhere else. Fresh fruit when available. Perhaps honey when he found a seller. The road itself became connected by food. The traveler finished his small portion of dried fruit and nuts. He drank some water. Then he sat quietly. Around him, the evening market continued. A seller called to a customer. Someone laughed. A donkey moved slowly through the street. A door closed nearby. A cooking fire crackled. The sky became darker. The lamp seemed brighter. There was something peaceful about eating while the world around you slowly became quiet. The traveler thought about his journey. He had crossed dusty roads. He had rested beneath trees. He had shared food with merchants. He had bought bread from bakers. He had tasted roasted grain. He had saved dates for later. None of these experiences were grand. Yet they were the things he would probably remember. A journey is often remembered through small sensations. The smell of bread in the morning. The warmth of roasted grain. The sweetness of dates. The sound of footsteps. The coolness of water. The shade beneath a tree. The evening fire. These details make a place feel real. The traveler eventually stood. He needed somewhere to sleep. A nearby inn offered a simple resting place. He carried his belongings inside. Before settling down, he checked his food pouch once more. There were still a few dates. Some nuts. A little dried fruit. Enough for tomorrow morning. He tied the pouch carefully. Then he placed it beside him. Outside, the market was becoming quiet. The last customers were leaving. Food sellers were covering their goods. The fires were being reduced. The remaining bread was wrapped. Dates were stored away. Nuts were gathered into containers. Tomorrow, everything would begin again. The traveler lay down. The room was simple. There were no luxurious decorations. No soft modern mattress. Just a place where a tired traveler could rest safely. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he could still smell the market. Bread. Smoke. Dates. Honey. Roasted grains. The smells blended together into the memory of the evening. He thought about how different ancient food was from the snacks available today. There were no colorful packets. No factory-made biscuits. No machines producing thousands of identical sweets. Instead, snacks came from things people could grow, gather, preserve, roast, bake, or trade. A date from a palm. A nut from a tree. Fruit dried beneath the sun. Grain roasted over fire. Honey gathered from bees. Bread made by hand. These foods were simple. But simplicity did not mean they were boring. People could combine them in countless ways. They could roast them, dry them, sweeten them, mix them, bake them, share them, carry them, and enjoy them. The traveler smiled at the thought. Perhaps the ancient equivalent of junk food was not really junk at all. It was simply food that could be enjoyed casually. A little sweetness between meals. A handful of nuts during work. A piece of bread while traveling. Dried fruit beside the road. Something roasted while waiting in a market. The purpose was often the same as it is today. To satisfy a small hunger. To enjoy a pleasant taste. To make a long day a little better. The traveler turned onto his side. Outside, the final sounds of the settlement faded. The road was quiet. The lamps disappeared one by one. The animals settled. The fires became embers. The night became deep and peaceful. His food pouch rested beside him. Tomorrow, he would open it again. Perhaps he would begin with bread. Perhaps a few nuts. Perhaps one of the dates he had carefully saved. Then he would return to the road. For tonight, though, there was nothing left to do. He had eaten. He had rested. He had found shelter. And the day had ended gently. Under the quiet Persian sky, the traveler slowly drifted toward sleep, carrying with him the simple sweetness of dates, the warmth of bread, and the peaceful memory of another day spent along the ancient road. The sweetness of simple things. The night had become very quiet by the time the traveler reached his resting place. He placed his small bundle beside the wall and sat for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the settlement. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, a final merchant was closing his stall. A door creaked. An animal shifted in the darkness. Then the sound slowly disappeared. Tomorrow he would leave. Tonight, there was nowhere else to go. He opened his food pouch one last time. Inside remained a few dates, some nuts, and a little dried fruit. He smiled at the small collection. These simple foods had accompanied him through many days. He took one date. Its sweetness filled his mouth gently. He ate slowly, remembering the road beneath the bright sun, the shaded trees where he had rested, and the markets where he had discovered different little foods. Then he took a few nuts. They were crisp and satisfying. Finally, he ate a small piece of dried fruit. That was enough. He tied the pouch and placed it beside him. As he settled down, he began thinking about everything he had learned about food during his journey. Ancient Persian people had lived in a world without modern convenience stores, refrigerators, plastic packages, vending machines, or brightly advertised snacks. Yet they still knew the pleasure of eating something small between meals. They still carried food when they traveled. They still enjoyed sweetness. They still roasted things because roasted food smelled wonderful. They still saved special treats for later. And they still gathered around food to talk. Perhaps that was the most comforting thought of all. The world had changed enormously, but people had not changed as much as we sometimes imagine. A hungry traveler still wanted something easy to eat. A tired worker still appreciated warm bread. A child still wanted something sweet. A family still enjoyed sharing food. A merchant still needed provisions for the road. A person still felt happier when a favorite treat was waiting nearby. The ingredients were simple, but the feelings were familiar. The traveler closed his eyes. He remembered the Persian markets he had visited. He remembered the baskets of dates glowing beneath the afternoon sun. He remembered the smell of bread emerging from ovens before sunrise. He remembered roasted nuts crackling over small fires. He remembered dried fruit hanging or resting in baskets. He remembered honey being measured carefully because sweetness was precious. He remembered travelers sharing bread beneath trees. He remembered children receiving dates from their parents. He remembered workers sitting in the shade with simple snacks. All of these moments belong to ordinary life. History often tells us about kings, armies, palaces, and great monuments. But beneath those grand stories was another world. A quieter world. A world of kitchens, markets, ovens, courtyards, roads, gardens, fields, and small fires. A world where people woke hungry and went to sleep satisfied. A world where food was prepared by hands and shared between neighbors. A world where a simple date could brighten a child's afternoon. A world where a piece of bread could make a long journey easier. The traveler breathed slowly. The night air was cool. A faint breeze entered through the opening of the room. He pulled his covering closer. Outside, the settlement had almost completely fallen asleep. The market that had been crowded earlier was now silent. The stalls were closed. The baskets were covered. The ovens were dark. Only a few embers remained from the evening fires. Tomorrow morning, the first baker would rise early. A fire would be started. Dough would be prepared. Bread would begin baking. The smell would once again travel through the streets. People would wake. Travelers would arrive. Workers would stop for food. Dates would be sold. Nuts would be roasted. And another ordinary day would begin. But the traveler would not be there to see it. He would be on the road. Perhaps another market would welcome him. Perhaps another seller would offer him a different sweet. Perhaps he would discover another simple food that would become part of his journey. That uncertainty was part of traveling. Every road brought something new. Yet certain things remained dependable. Water, bread, dates, nuts, dried fruit, and the kindness of people willing to share. The traveler smiled in the darkness. He thought about the phrase we might use today, junk food. It was tempting to imagine ancient people having their own version of it. But perhaps the comparison needed to be gentle. Their snacks were not usually highly processed foods designed for long shelves and instant convenience. Instead, they were simple foods made convenient by preparation. Fruit was dried. Grain was roasted. Nuts were carried. Bread was baked. Honey was added. Dates were preserved naturally. These foods could be quick to eat, easy to carry, and enjoyable. They were the little pleasures between larger meals. And perhaps that is what connects them to our own world. A snack does not have to be complicated. Sometimes it is simply something small that makes the moment better. The traveler turned onto his side. His body was becoming heavy with sleep. The market, the road, the warm bread, the roasted nuts, and the sweetness of dates slowly faded from his thoughts. Outside, the settlement rested beneath the stars. Tomorrow, the ovens would burn again, sellers would arrange their baskets, and travelers would search for food. But tonight there was only silence, cool air, and rest. The traveler closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He had eaten enough. He had traveled far. And beneath the peaceful Persian sky, surrounded by memories of simple food and gentle evenings, he finally drifted into a deep, quiet sleep.